Welcome to the July 30th, 2020 school board meeting. This meeting is now in session and is being conducted by electronic communications using Microsoft Teams due to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency. We will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We are now at the citizen comment portion of our meeting. Due to the COVID-19 emergency, we have adjusted our speaker process. At this time, we can only allow call-in speakers who have signed up in advance. Directions for signing up to speak are posted on our website. And one moment, please. Dr. Cannon, I need the speaker guidelines, and I don't have them. I wonder if they might be on my... They are. Oh, you think they're in your... On my... Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. So at this time, we can only allow call-in speakers who have signed up in advance. Directions for signing up to speak are posted on our website. Because we are using a purchase service to manage speaker calls, we have adjusted our procedures to minimize cost, including limiting the time for speakers to a maximum of 1 hour at each meeting. Currently, we ask speakers to sign up by 4 p.m. 2 days prior to the meeting. If we do not have any speakers sign up at that time, we can cancel the service at a minimum cost. Otherwise, we will have to pay the cost even if we do not use the service. We will adjust these procedures as needed if we find more effective ways to allow public comment. We do have 12 speakers who signed up tonight. And so I will go ahead and review our approved speaker guidelines before we begin. The school board welcomes public comment from community members. For our virtual meetings, we will hear comments on all agenda and non-agenda items at one time at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers must sign up in advance to receive the call-in information. The day of the meeting, speakers should call in to the number provided 10 to 15 minutes prior to the meeting start. Speakers will be announced in the order their call is received. Before you speak, please be sure to turn down the sound on any electronic devices. Please do not use a speakerphone, as that can distort the sound and make your comments difficult to understand. Each speaker may speak for up to 2 minutes, and there is a timer that will keep track of your time. The timer begins when the speaker starts speaking, and you should conclude your remarks when the buzzer sounds. The operator will disconnect you at 2 minutes. The board does not respond to public hearing comments. There are times when public hearing comments require follow-up due to the nature of the comments. Where follow-up is needed, the superintendent will work with the school board clerk to follow up accordingly after the board meeting. If you have written comments, you may email them to the school board at school.board@apsva.us. Please be sure to state your name and the topic you will speak about when you begin. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, will you call for the speakers?
Yes, ma'am, I will. It looks like we have 8 speakers who have actually called in today. First is Caroline Knox Burns.
Burns, mother to a rising 4th grader at Arlington, and I am one of the 73% of APS parents comfortable with the hybrid option. Although I'm very disappointed that the hybrid option was taken off the table for the start of school, I'm very grateful to Dr. Duran that he has left the hybrid option on the table for some point this fall. I'm speaking tonight to share 3 thoughts. Number 1, those parents who prefer for their children to attend school virtually this year, for whatever reason, should have that option, and they do. I would not want to take that option away from them. But likewise, those parents like myself who prefer for our children to attend school in person should also have that option. We have each performed our own cost-benefit analysis of what is best for our children, and the benefits of an in-person education with their teachers and with their peers outweigh any potential cost for us. I urge Dr. Duran and the school board not to project the will of one group of parents onto the other. Number 2, any decision in light of students' health and safety should include their mental health as a factor. Ignoring their mental health ignores the biggest cost to kids in the pandemic thus far. And finally, to borrow a line from the movie Jerry Maguire, help us help you. If buses are a major obstacle to opening your doors, tell us. Send parents a new survey regarding their need for busing, and I'm sure more would be willing to drive their kids to school if that's what it takes. If funding for PPE is a concern, I'll be the first to donate to a procurement fund so that sufficient PPE is in the hands of our teachers on the glorious day when that first school bell rings. Thank you for your time and your continued efforts to get our school doors open.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker, please. Perhaps we might have the clerk on mute.
Our next speaker is Erin Neal.
Hi, I'm Erin Neal, mother to a rising second grader and a rising sixth grader, and I am one of the 73% of APS parents comfortable with the hybrid option. But like Lucy with the football, the hybrid option was taken away. Why? Since late May, Arlington and Northern Virginia have seen relatively flat COVID case numbers. Arlington has only had 3 days with more than 10 daily cases per 100,000 population, a metric important to the Harvard Global Health Institute, which in their Path to Zero plan should enable our schools a phased reopening at all grade levels. So I'm here tonight to ask for 3 things. First, for APS to be more open and transparent about what the leadership is looking for in changing public health statistics, then versus now, to enable in-person learning to move forward. In the absence of information, it appears that APS has thrown up its hands and given up on the hybrid option. Second, I asked APS to continue parallel planning for reopening the school doors for the hybrid model, including communicating all logistics and details. APS's Bridget Locke says, quote, all resources will be devoted to distance learning in the fall. But what parallel efforts are also being devoted to transitioning to the hybrid model? Third, let's please exercise some creativity and some commitment to doing things differently. Our lives in society have been fundamentally disrupted. Show families that a school district with a $600 million budget can be nimble, flexible, and responsive. Show our children the growth mindset in action. Finally, during tonight's meeting, could each of the board members address whether you believe APS should be making every effort to return to in-person instruction as soon as possible this fall? And if so, what steps you specifically have taken to make that happen? In closing, I want to tell you that at in-person camps this summer, my kids are wearing masks most all day, every day. And as my 7-year-old says, masks go on inside, masks go off outside. Easy peasy, Mama. If our little kids can do this, we certainly can make this work. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Jessica Idle.
Hi, my name's Jessica Idle, and I'm a third grade teacher at APS. I'm also a new mother to a 10-week-old baby, and I'm considered in the high-risk category for COVID-19. Both of these factors make me extremely apprehensive about being asked and forced to go back into the classroom to teach, especially considering that I'm unable to quarantine away from my newborn daughter. I support the One APS model, and I will not feel safe re-entering the classroom until there are either no new cases for 14 days or until there is a vaccine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for sharing your comments. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Courtney Fox.
Good evening. My name is Courtney Fox, and I'm speaking in support of One APS. Let's start with what's really going on. We are scared, and we are all mourning the loss of our old normal. The irony is that normal, while familiar, had problems. Special education students were left behind a long time ago. The APS history with English learners and BIPOC students isn't something to be proud of. The data for these groups is undeniable, and it makes my heart ache. We are experiencing a paradigm shift. It is not one we chose based on research and best practices, but it is one we must embrace. and we can use research and best practices to make sure no students are left behind again. But we only have 5 weeks left to get this right. As we all start the year online, we need to follow brain research on everything from schedules to course load to content delivery. Let's retain the original master schedules for individual schools, assign teachers to courses they are not only certified to teach, but ones they have mastered, and keep CLTs together. Let's make a strong commitment to equity, inclusion, and accessibility, a blanket reduction in IEP service hours when those vulnerable students need more support, not less, is not how you instill trust or demonstrate commitment. We need to level the playing field for all marginalized students and intentionally design an inclusive system through restorative practices and universal design for learning. We need to involve teachers and staff in this process. We should all be listening to them now. And we need to have a serious community-wide conversation about making this next year work for working families, including APS staff who themselves are parents. This crisis will either tear us apart or bond us together. We must protect the integrity of the system for the long run. We must remain one APS. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker.
Next, we have Simone Walker.
Hi, I'm Simone Walker, parent in APS. As we prepare to begin the school year with virtual learning, we must recognize that any plan short of having students back in school 5 days a week presents a childcare conundrum that threatens the economic stability of parents and the county. Parents with means will hire nannies or au pairs. Close-knit neighbors will coalesce to establish pods to manage the supervision of virtual learning. What will happen to those students whose parents must work outside the home and can't afford childcare or don't have a network performing pods? Children will be left alone and learning will not occur. The educational inequities in APS were prevalent before COVID-19 and will be exacerbated because of it. APS and the county must work together as one Arlington to find solutions such as hubs or pods where our most vulnerable students can go, a safe space with Wi-Fi and supervision so that they can meaningfully participate in virtual learning. We have community centers, gyms, libraries, public parks, churches, and office spaces that could be repurposed for this. APS and the county must work together to brainstorm creative solutions to prevent the learning gap from widening even further. Absent childcare solutions, children will continue to fall further behind. Financially vulnerable families will slip further into poverty if they forego working to supervise their children's learning. Child abuse and neglect cases may rise if students have nowhere to go. Teachers may be forced to choose between teaching our children and caring for their own, leading to a dreaded teacher shortage. These are untenable choices to make and unreasonable ones to expect. Let us come together as one Arlington to find equitable solutions. We can and must do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Ken Booth.
Good evening, Dr. Duran and members of the board. My name is Ken Booth, and I am the father of an Arlington Public Schools teacher. Like every parent, I want what's best for my children, but the current APS plan to prioritize parents' preference over teachers puts my daughter at risk, while APS students and their families got to make the voice between virtual and hybrid as a teacher. My daughter did not. I'm asking you to value all APS families, not just students, but your employees' families as well, and adopt the one APS model. Commit that no APS teacher will have to choose between their job and their safety. Commit that no teacher will have to choose between a paycheck and protecting their high-risk family members. It's time to live up to APS's core value of inclusivity, to strengthen our community by valuing people for who they are, nurturing our diversity, and embracing the contributions of all students, families, and staff. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Kayla Leonberger.
Kayla, you may be muted.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can begin.
Okay. My name is Kayla Leonberger, and I'm a teacher, a special education 7th grade teacher in APS. Before I share, I'd like to thank Superintendent Duran for his compassionate and wise decision to begin school virtually this year. This decision makes me feel like our new superintendent not only listens to teachers and staff, but also knows that our student and staff safety needs to be our number one priority during this pandemic. I know that many other teachers feel the same way. I want to share my perspective on virtual learning. I, of course, miss seeing my students in person. Everything is different when I have to communicate with them through a screen. However, I am seeing a lot of discourse in our community about how teachers advocating for virtual learning means that we are lazy, don't enjoy teaching, or don't want to work. This could not be further from the truth. During our closure this past school year, I consistently worked more hours daily than I did during normal school weeks, making sure all my content was accessible and engaging in its new online format. For example, both differentiating content and providing accommodations such as adding captions to my videos so that my deaf and hard of hearing students could access them. I truly believe that if we spend our resources, both financially and in professional development, on ensuring that all staff feels confident about online platforms and technology, and on ensuring that all Arlington students have unlimited access to quality, high-speed internet, then virtual learning can and will be a great success for as long as we have to do it, while securing the safety of our children. Let's not waste time fighting about the risks. In my opinion, any preventable death of any number of students and staff is unacceptable. Virtual learning is tough, but if it prevents just one Arlington student from dying unnecessarily, then I believe it is more than worth it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Okay, our final speaker is Mr. Paul Brickley.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Paul Brickley, and I'm the dad of kids at an Arlington Public High School, husband to a pre-K teacher, and speaking from decades of experience in government organizations and leadership. I don't envy the job of the board or the superintendent in these turbulent times, but my experience with crisis management tells me that in the absence of direction, we must make our own. And as I said at the last meeting, that means applying all our efforts and in good faith with our constituents to identify solutions that best we possibly can. My concern remains that 139 days have lapsed since the governor closed schools on March 13th. But in that 139 days, not one actual plan with details is manifested. A variety of concepts were floated, but instead of orchestrating a comprehensive study behind which the majority of people and opinions could rally and see as transparent, the direction given pacifies a minority opinion that vocalizes a singular viewpoint with a verbal equivalent of pitchforks and torches. The option directed was made in the absence of intellectual rigor, impartial examination of facts, and an unbiased operational analysis. Placating fear is not a sustainable leadership model. We are Arlington, and we are better than this. As I stated 2 weeks ago, I want to help, and I'm volunteering. I recommended 3 task force or subcommittees to study the 3 options that the bulk of the population wants: distance learning, hybrid, or in person. All families and teachers fall into at least one of these buckets. I want to help establish these task force representing the socioeconomic and cultural spectrum and do a deep dive framed by considerations for teacher safety, student safety, logistics, curriculum, resourcing, and management of each option. The options can and should run concurrently. The results can go to the superintendent, the board, or whomever will make the decision. There are answers here. We just have to do the work to find them. Not everyone will be happy, but the majority will appreciate a transparent process and the opportunity for choice. We are capable of finding the answers, given Arlington's collective intellect, infrastructure, and resources, and providing a solution that truly can be a national model, and in a climate where the bulk of the population realistically goes to retail, restaurants, parks, athletic fields, and youth events.
Thank
all
you
while
very
traveling
much for your
roadways and highways.
comments. I'm sorry your time has expired. I appreciate you dialing in to share your thoughts. And that is the end of our speakers for this evening. We are now at announcements. On Tuesday, August the 11th, the Policy Subcommittee will hold a virtual meeting at noon. On August 13th, the board will have a virtual closed meeting at 5:15 p.m. Also on August 13th, we will hold a virtual work session on return to school planning, which will begin at 6:30 p.m. And on August 18th, we will hold a virtual work session on the Heights Building and CIP planning at 6 p.m. Now I'd like to invite my fellow board members to make any announcements they may have. Let's start with Ms. Talento. Ms. Talento, do you have any announcements today?
No, thank you, Ms. O'Grady.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talento. Ms. Van Dorn, do you have any announcements today?
I just want to let the community know that I was invited to and enjoyed attending a very large fleet town hall. That's the PTA town hall, in which parents and families got to hear in detail about how the plans are evolving for our virtual opening of school. And it was very, very informative to me. The principal, Dr. Legener, was able to answer parents' questions and provide detail at the school level. And I encourage everybody to ask those questions of their principal and get those answers. There are a lot of questions coming at the system, but I think we all want to know what's actually going to happen day to day in our children's lives. And I just really want to commend Gary Bellin and the PTA for organizing that, and for Dr. Legener for giving such superb and direct answers that were very helpful to the community. So I was pleased to be part of that, and I was pleased to watch as we evolve deeper and stronger plans for our opening. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. Mr. Goldstein, do you have any announcements today?
I would just like to echo what Nancy said. I also was involved in 3 virtual town halls put on by the PTA, 3 of my liaison schools in the last week or week and a half or something, and also found them very informative, very useful. I believe all the participants found them that way. I want to commend the PTAs for doing this, for reaching out, putting them on, and also the principals did a superb job of answering questions and following up with the questions that couldn't be answered in the time frame for the meeting, but followed up with written responses afterwards. So just wanted to note that and say thank you to all the participants. And this is extremely useful to me, and I think to all my colleagues. So I encourage everybody to continue to do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. Vice Chair Cannon.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say that I had the opportunity to attend a food distribution that was supported by the Abingdon PTA. I saw that there were teachers there. There were even some SROs there supporting a community along Columbia Pike. And I just want to say thank you very much to our community members who are coming together, working with private and public partners to help supplement communities that are in need. I think that this is a great show of strength and our community coming together to help support our families at this time. I want to commend the Abingdon community for coming together to support members of their schools. And I want to also acknowledge and thank all the other PTAs and communities that are coming together to support our Arlingtonians in need. So just wanted to share that. I enjoyed being able to be there and see the support. In addition to that, I have one other announcement. During our last meeting, there was an information item presented by staff after several inquiries from families regarding a reduction of pre-K fees for the Montessori and Community Peer Pre-K program, also called CPP. Staff has provided an update via School Talk, and I also want to share just part of it here. Primary Montessori and CPP fees help fund staffing and student materials. Students enrolled in these programs will receive 5 hours and 20 minutes of synchronous teacher-led and asynchronous instruction Tuesday through Friday, as well as 1 hour of instruction on Mondays, and a sample schedule is available online. Today, there's no action item on tonight's agenda regarding that proposal, and therefore, there will be no changes to the Montessori or CPP tuition fees for the 2021 school year, and the fee schedule previously adopted stands. Dr. Duran, I believe you might have a little bit more information on that.
Yes, Chair Talento, and I'd like to say if there's any family members whose income has changed due to the pandemic, I encourage them to reach out to our early childhood office to see if their fees can be adjusted based on changes to their income. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran. And I'd also like to share that since our school board meeting on July 16th, the board continues to receive messages related to the distance learning model for this fall. Some of the concerns shared include instruction for students with disabilities and English language learners, technology needs, school start times, and the reopening of schools. The board is also receiving messages from teachers and staff concerning plans for the fall. Questions about the reopening plan should be directed to Engage at engage@apsva.us or submitted via the Engage online form. Due to the volume of messages received, it may take staff some time to provide replies. We appreciate the community's patience as staff continues to plan for the upcoming school year. Dr. Duran will continue to share updates and information via School Talk every Tuesday and also at board meetings under the monitoring agenda item. In addition, the school board is receiving messages on school resource officers in schools and defunding the police. The school board will include the ACPD MOU in school board's work plan for this school year, and we're working to develop a discussion timeframe in developing a community engagement plan on this topic. We appreciate the community's engagement, especially during these unprecedented times. Please rest assured, the board and the superintendent are reviewing emails and receive a weekly report of messages received for consideration. Dr. Duran, do you have any announcements or updates to share?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair O'Grady. A few announcements for tonight, and short ones since we're in the summertime, but here's a few important ones I want to share. We continue to ensure that our students have access to food during the pandemic, and this slide is a reminder, we've been showing this each time, to give an update, and we continue at our 9 locations to continue to serve lunch and breakfast for children ages 2 to 18 on Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday. Up to this point, we have served over 386,000 meals since we began this on March 16th. As a reminder, we've continued to serve meals throughout the summer as part of the summer food program due to the pandemic and making sure students have access to meals. Meal service of this type will continue through Friday, August 28th. At that time, the summer meal program waiver ends, so our meal service will pause during the week of August 31st as we transition to the National School Lunch Program on the first day of school, September 8th. We will use that week in between to prepare for meal service for the new school year. As we transition to the National School Lunch Program, we're also looking at how we can expand to additional sites beyond these 9, as well as we're exploring possibilities of providing meal delivery so that we can ensure that we're serving the needs of our students during full-time distance learning and in preparation for transition to our in-person learning. While no official decisions have been made about the sites yet or how the meals will be provided, we are working on plans and we will definitely communicate those prior to the start of the school year. We're up in the middle of summer school, and our summer distance learning program began last week on Monday, July 20th, running through August 14th. So a few updates on what's happening there. At the secondary level, we're offering a strengthening program for students who earned a D or E as a final grade and selected new work for credit on their social studies classes. Secondary teachers report that 50% of their classes, or about 200 students, are logging on regularly and completing their work. We have full support teams working to connect with families and are employing strategies such as daily attendance quizzes to provide an incentive to log in. Some families report not knowing the dates, so despite robocalls and school talk, combined with the efforts of teachers and liaisons to connect, we need to look better at how we can reach families in the future. This is an area of improvement needed. Technology has been a barrier for some of our students accessing courses, and many of those issues are being addressed and have been addressed. Certainly our Comcast Internet Essentials has helped many families, but it does take a few days to set up once families have the code, and so we're working on that with Comcast and how we can improve that. Teachers are going, though, above and beyond to engage their students with innovative lessons, and I want to thank all of our summer learning teachers. Our EL teachers and general ed teachers are collaborating with support from their bilingual family liaisons, our social workers, our counselors. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Many of our EL teachers are providing synchronous lessons for their students to supplement their learning, and this is making a difference for that population which needs that equitable access to learning. So a lot is happening at the secondary level, and there's also some areas that we need to work on. At the elementary level, elementary students who were previously identified for summer strengthening have been provided devices, all of them have received their devices, and access to adaptive math and literacy programs and support from their school-based instructional staff, and they're having regular check-ins and open office hours. Good news here is that 90% of our elementary students who are identified have been engaged, and that's about 1,999 to be exact, and 560 extended school year students. Teachers at the elementary level are holding regular office hours, as I mentioned, and they're doing daily check-in logs for every student and monitoring their progress. We've gotten some positive feedback on the daily office hours and changes in that from some parents and our teacher check-ins, and we want to thank again our elementary teachers now for taking the time to connect daily and provide that support with our students there as we work through those adaptive math and literacy programs to help strengthen those skills. And again, all at the elementary level students have received devices, and the initial technology challenges that were with elementary students have been addressed. So some good positive things and a couple of areas for improvement that we need to work on. Now, my last announcement is about our Let's Talk Summer Student Series. This summer series on race is underway, and I want to provide a brief update on the schedule for that. As a reminder, this is a virtual series for middle and high school students, and this is allowing our students to identify problems and create solutions and advocating for change. Our July 22nd session to explore issues of race and policing was postponed. Given the sheer number of issues regarding police, community, and youth of color, we decided that a 1-hour session was not sufficient, and we're working to extend the time. We're assessing new dates now, and we will be rescheduling before September to allow our subject matter experts and our students more time to discuss this very much needed topic for our youth. The next session in the Let's Talk series is Wednesday, August 5th. On August 5th, students will be exploring how they can responsibly use social media to fight for social justice by tapping into their innate curiosity about what causes that interest, draw upon examples of social media that have captured their interest, and take away lessons that they can use and encourage the use of their voice. We have an outstanding support cast for that day on August 5th to encourage our students, including Phone to Action, Arlington for Justice, and Choose to Be Curious. And these sessions are specific to middle school and then high school, so there are 2 different times when those meet. If you've missed any of the previous sessions in the series, you can certainly visit the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion webpage and watch them. And students interested in participating in any of these sessions should register online at the website listed there. Madam Chair, that concludes all of my announcements for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran. Let me find out from my colleagues if there are any questions regarding your announcements. Let's start with Ms. Van Dorn. Ms. Van Dorn, do you have any questions for the superintendent?
I don't. I just appreciate the information and appreciate the review that we'll be doing to figure out how do we make sure more of our students to connect, and maybe we can find out why. So thank you for undertaking that task.
Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. Mr. Goldstein.
I do not have any additional questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talento.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady. I did just want to just recap, ask Dr. Duran to perhaps recap the information provided for the food distribution. I thought that I heard you mention we will be transitioning to the regular food program. I don't know what the correct regular food program in September. And I just missed if you covered additional information on that. I know that we our waivers are expiring in August 31st, and so there'll be a change, but I don't know if you covered a little bit of that, if we're going to cover that in return to school, if we're still waiting for information. If you could just reiterate that, I think it's important to say that again, and I want to make sure I heard the information you shared correctly.
Sure. So at this time, we are working on how we would expand beyond the 9 sites that we currently have. As I indicated, yes, the waiver ends, so it's a different program. It's not the same grab and go. It's back to the National School Lunch Program. And so we're looking at that, and we're also looking at possibilities of how we might be able to do meal delivery. But Those are the only details I provided, and we will be bringing back more information as we finalize that plan in the coming weeks.
Thank you. I know all of this is such new information, and sometimes the board is being updated at the board meeting as well. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything, and I know that many times you're able to get the information previewed, but with how everything is changing so rapidly during the pandemic and in the education world, I just wanted to double check that, and thank you so much for sharing that information again, Dr. Dunn. Thank you, Ms. O'Grady.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Ms. Talento. Vice Chair Cannonen.
No, thank you. Not at this time. Thank you, Ms. O'Grady.
Okay, thank you very much. I do have a question for you, Dr. Duran. As we look to transitioning back to a situation where it looks as though our students and their families may have to, again, be paying for meals, I just want to ensure that for families who are out there who may have had a different financial situation, that we encourage them to let us know that, or what can they do to make sure that when this change actually happens, they have, if they need it, the ability to access free or reduced meals.
Well, as it stands with the federal lunch program, there are qualifications based on income. So if their income has changed, they should work with their school and provide the appropriate documentation to see if they qualify now, perhaps if they did not qualify previously, for free or reduced. And so that's what I would encourage them to work with their schools individually if they feel that now they're in a different financial situation and in the previous year they did not have free or reduced as an option for them.
Thank you very much. And we also, I believe, as I understand it, we do have bilingual resource assistance in case people are concerned about being able to,
Yes.
In case they need translation. Is that correct?
Yes, we have translation services available to help any family that may need that support.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. We are now at our consent agenda. Before we vote on consent, I want to announce that item 5, the Long Branch APS DPR Playground Easement Lease Agreement, has been removed from consent and will be brought back to a future meeting. May I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda as amended?
So moved from Nancy.
Thank you, Ms. Van Dorn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cannonen. The clerk will call the roll.
All those in favor of the motion say yes. Those opposed say no. Mr. Goldstein?
Yes.
Dr. Cannonen?
Yes.
Ms. O'Grady?
Yes.
Ms. Talento?
Yes.
Ms. Van Dorn?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much, Ms. Elliott. I'd like to announce that under consent, the board approved our civic liaison assignments for the 2020-2021 school year. We also approved 4 facility items, including 2 agreements with the Arlington Department of Parks and Recreation to allow APS to use part of Fillmore Park to accommodate student needs at Long Branch Elementary School, and 2 agreements with the county related to renovations at the Career Center and the Columbia Pike Library. Finally, as part of our consent agenda, the board appointed Cindy Schall as assistant principal at Arlington Community High School. Ms. Schall has many years of experience as an educator and is a national board certified teacher. She joined APS in 1987 and since 1989 has been an animal science teacher at the Career Center, where she has held several leadership roles, including instructional lead teacher and CTE lead teacher. She has conducted professional development workshops on using technology in education and on keeping animals in the classroom. She has also served as summer school assistant principal at Arlington Community High School for 10 years. Through this work, she has come to appreciate the determination and grit that ACHS students demonstrate on their way to earning their diplomas. We're pleased to have Ms. Schall with us, and we know that she'll continue to use her strong leadership skills and abilities to help ACHS students achieve their dreams. Congratulations, Ms. Schall.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be able to work with Arlington Community.
That's wonderful. Now, do you have anyone with you there? Maybe?
I do have a co-teacher, a former co-teacher. Luna, come here. I don't know if she'll, Luna, nope, over here.
Aw.
Nope, over here, come here.
Aw.
There we go.
Aw, excellent. Well, thank you for introducing us to Luna as well, and congratulations, and we're excited to have you in your new role. Thank you. Okay, now we are at monitoring items, and we have one monitoring item, the return to school status update. Dr. Duran.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady. As we continue through the summer, our team is working extremely hard to prepare for our full distance learning and also to ensure that we continue planning for when we can return in person in the fall, when and if it is safe to do so. We want to make sure that we're providing the community, the board, and engaging in constant updates. As was said already by Board Member Talento, we're constantly receiving new information, and we're working hard to prepare and make adjustments as we receive that. This evening, I would like to share progress on the latest information on health and safety, our family, student, and staff preferences, instruction and technology, as well as some very important updates on athletics, childcare, and staffing. Health and safety remains at the center of our return to school planning as we continue to monitor COVID-19 developments both nationally and locally. I continue to engage with families and employees, and we're receiving additional many questions and comments on what guidance on how we will transition to in-person or when we will, what measures we might use to determine when we can open safely. As you've seen since our announcement to begin virtually, many other school divisions in our region, including DC just today, have made similar announcements, giving the many layers of complexity involved with reopening our schools in the current environment. There are many, many layers to this, and no one criteria or metric is the one that we'll be looking at for determining the decision. The Virginia Department of Health is developing a multivariable dashboard to help communities and schools, but it is not yet ready. In the meantime, this slide lists some of the factors that we are considering as we make decisions on when to begin in-phasing in person. First, our student and family instructional preferences, as well as our employee work preferences, are key factors, and I will be speaking to those results from the July surveys shortly. We must consider staff and student safety first, and retaining our high-quality workforce during this pandemic and ensuring that our staff can work safely is essential as they drive our success and the success of our students. We are seeing also that global supply availability is becoming a challenge for specific vendors, and the cost of item availability is beginning to rise. While we do have stocked up and prepared many items in advance for this, we have to consider this factor as we move ahead. In the next few slides, I'll be mentioning our local health metrics in more specifics, but please know that we are reviewing all local, regional, and national health metrics as part of our criteria. As you can see on this slide, there are variations and fluctuations in the data we're seeing in Arlington County and around our national capital region. There has been a trend and an overall increase inside and outside the Commonwealth in the weekly case rates, up and down. With health and safety as our priority, the virus data we take into account is broader than Arlington, especially since many of our staff reside outside of Arlington, and we continue to look at the data for all of Northern Virginia, Maryland, and DC. Numbers must be declining everywhere in our area for us to continue to think about how we will return, and so we must look at that full picture. We're going to continue to watch the data and encourage our families to be vigilant in wearing their mask outside their home at all times, maintain that social distance of 6 feet, wash hands frequently, and avoid frequently touched surfaces when possible so we can get these cases down and lower the community spread in Arlington and in the national capital region. This graph here shows our specific Arlington County daily changes that we see. As we live in a large transient region, we continue to look at our data as it compares and interacts with the regional and national data as I've shared. So we also need to anticipate that the Virginia Department of Health, a new dashboard, will provide more indicators that will help us look at a tool for that health data from their perspective. And so I look forward to seeing what that will be. This slide reiterates our commitments to health and safety and how we're working together toward reopening safely. This is broader than just our schools, and we have to continue our work, and I want to thank the Arlington County and Arlington County Public Health Division in helping us with these decisions. We've also taken the feedback from our stakeholders, our task force, our students, our families, and staff, and we are seriously utilizing those suggestions and concerns as we plan. So thank you for sending in your emails, your suggestions, your questions. We do review those, and While we're not responding to each and every one, we are responding if there are questions on the Engage page, and we are taking those suggestions into our planning. I want to continue to mention that even as we prepare to resume instruction, our approach will be a phased-in gradual approach based on the data and trends that I have been mentioning. There will not be a situation in which we are likely to announce that on a certain date, all families and everyone on that same date who selected hybrid instruction will return. We will and are planning to approach returning in phases by groups of students based on need, state guidance, and other factors. Our goal is to begin to prioritize with our early learners in grades pre-K to 3, special education students, and English learners, and phase in, when safe, for all students who selected the hybrid model. Our commitment to our families and the success of our students is key, and we are all working together on solutions to support families and provide mental health and other services for those who need us most during this time. This is a system-wide and a community effort that requires all of our commitment to change past practices and be innovative. And I appreciate the partnership of our PTAs and our nonprofits in this work. And again, I want to reiterate that this is something that we must all think differently about how we engage in our daily lives so that we can return to some sense of normalcy. It will not be the same, but we have to make those changes. Very important. This slide is just a reminder of our core health and safety commitments. We've gotten some questions. We have not and will not change from these commitments about physical distancing with 6 feet, that masks are required to be used. We also have been receiving some questions on return to work in school, and schools and departments are using a template with the latest public health guidance that will develop a plan for return to work in school for staff. We're asking everyone to work with us through this. Staff have been asking if they can have access to facilities and classrooms for distance learning. They may need to come in and get materials. So we are working on that, and that will be coming out school by school. We'll have those plans in place with that guidance from the health department. For training, all of our employees will be required to complete a COVID awareness training prior to returning to in-person operations. And as I mentioned before, but although we continue to get asked hand sanitizer, we've discontinued the practice of prohibiting that, even though that is not the main way to protect ourselves. It is just a supplement, as washing hands is very important and critical. Now, transitioning to giving an update on the initial selection process for families, as well as the surveys for our staff, I want to walk through a high-level summary of those results, which are informing our plans. We completed the family selection process on July 20th and received 21,870 responses, which is 79% of our students. While we always aim for 100%, this is great considering the outcome, a great outcome considering there was a 2-week window in our summertime. So I want to thank all the families who participated and completed the process, as our announcement to transition to a full-time distance came in the midst of that process. And I want to thank our school staff, our bilingual family liaisons, the Department of School and Community Relations, Information Services, and our community partners who helped get the word out about this process, and so many of them who assisted our families in accessing ParentView and making those selections. As you can see, 54% of families selected hybrid instruction, 25% chose full-time distance learning, and 21% did not make a selection, and as we said, those that did not make, for planning purposes, we defaulted to hybrid. I have heard from many, many, many families that they have made or changed their selection after our announcement, noting that they feel more confident selecting the in-person model, knowing that we will not return right away at the start of the school and will proceed cautiously and gradually. And a total of 11,941 student choices, in fact, were made after our announcement about distance learning to start later in the school year. 54.5% of all student choices were made after that announcement, and 63% selected hybrid of that group. As I noted, there will be another window provided later on when families can change their selection, as we have more solidified plans on when we might be able to return. This slide here shows the breakdown by subgroup, including English learners, students with special needs, and students who qualify for free and reduced price meals. This shows that there is a steady and consistent response rate. If you account for defaults to hybrid and selections across the board, we see a rough breakdown of 75 hybrid and 25 full distance, and again, that's with the default in there. Or you could see 54, 58, and 53 hybrid for those that did select. We concluded that also with our scale teacher preference summaries on July 20th, as those ran at the same time as our parent selection process to assist with planning for the fall. 2,523, or 90% of our teachers, completed the survey, which asked, given APS implementation of the health and safety measures outlined by VDOE and VDH, what is your first preference for returning and working with students? So as you can see here, 55% of respondents, 55% of our respondents prefer to support the full-time distance instruction. That's 1,396. 33% prefer in-person. 11% did not have a preference, and 0.56 or 15 respondents said they do not plan to return to work or intend to request a leave of absence or retire or resign. Human Resources is reviewing all this information in combination with other factors, and this will help in our work planning forward. Monday, July 27th was the final day for all other staff other than our teachers on T-scale to complete the survey, which ran from the 13th of July to the 27th. Here you see the breakdown of preferences for both school-based and central office-based staff. Total responses received overall represent 66% of those staff, or a total of 1,476 responses. There is consistency here as well amongst both the school-based and central office staff, with both roughly half selecting distance and the other half selecting in-person instruction or having no preference. Specifically, 55% of school staff prefer returning in distance and teleworking, 33% prefer in-person work, and 11 state no preference. Similar in the central office, you can see it's 53 to telework, 26 to work in the office, and 20 with no preference. For each, you also see a small number indicating that they will not return at all. 27% of all of our staff state that childcare is a barrier for them to return. And the selections overall provide us a barometer and a good baseline of understanding comfort levels with returning and helping us again with our planning purposes. Moving on to instruction. This week, our task force focused and continued to focus on instruction, and specifically drilling down further into plans for how we will make sure that we provide quality instruction for our students, English learners, our special education students, and our gifted students. And since I have presented a lot of that information in the last report, the focus tonight is on scheduling using the data I just presented and a few other updates. We've received a lot of questions about how student and staff selections for returning are going to factor into grouping students and arranging classes now that we are beginning in full distance. Schools and the Department of Teaching and Learning are working closely together to use these results of the family and staff preferences to develop their master schedules and create student groups. It is our intention to align preferred options wherever possible in anticipation of any transition to in-person learning at some point in the year when safe. But we recognize that a perfect alignment will not be possible, especially given that both families and staff have another opportunity to make those selections. We are, as we previously stated, keeping siblings in mind as a major factor in planning and making sure that they have aligned schedules for in-person instruction in the future when that phasing begins. And when developing our master schedules and creating student groups, we will consider the academic and social-emotional needs of our children we serve first and foremost. Our teachers, school counselors, and administrators will be preparing throughout the summer to meet the unique opportunity we have ahead of us. And we know that it's a challenge, but we're working through this. Our long-standing and well-earned tradition of providing rich and supportive learning experiences in whatever instructional model families select. School will be very different, but we are putting our best resources to ensuring that students are engaged, they're growing, and they're supported. We're committed to ensuring that there are tiered systems of support in place to motivate, engage, and monitor the progress of our students. We're adhering to our policies regarding attendance and student progress, program, and our grading, which again is different than what occurred in the spring when we were in distance learning. Lastly, each APS school is committed to providing support and guidance to the children we serve through counselors and other supports needed. We've learned from our closure at the end of the 1920 school year, and we're continuing to learn, even as I mentioned in my previous announcements, about our summer experience. We need to use this knowledge, and we are using it, to identify and engage instructional and support practices that have proven to be most effective for our students and our families, and with input from our staff. As I've stated in previous presentations, we're putting our efforts now focusing on ensuring we provide high-quality learning for students via distance learning in the fall and in training, and then also, again, continuing to look at the data on how and when we might return. The experience will be very different from the spring, and I'll keep saying that over and over again on purpose because it is something we're intentionally looking at. A significant part of our effort to make it very different is making sure our teachers and staff are ready and well prepared with all the tools, the skills, and the resources that they need to support our students fully. This here is just a sample of the schedule we have planned, which includes tool-specific support on APS tools, practices for distance learning, a lot of important information about how our staff can instruct and operate in a virtual setting. And I know that, as you heard one of our speakers on the public comment, our staff are really rolling up their sleeves and wanting to do the very best because they want to be with their students. And our teachers, I'm very impressed and thankful for their commitment to saying to all of us, what can we do? We will be there. Help us. Here are some things we need. And I'm so thankful and I'm very appreciative and honored to work with such a great group of teachers in Arlington Public Schools. I want to thank the Department of Information Services for working very hard to ensure that our students and staff members who need access and devices and tools are having those put in place. And I want to provide a few updates on what that work is. All students will have devices, as we've mentioned before, for the start of the school year. And many of our students already have devices, so our focus is providing devices to those students who don't have one yet. And we know we started with our pre-K to 2. Once we are confident that all of our students have devices, we're going to begin replacing the 6th and 9th graders' devices. New teachers will be able to pick up their laptops at SciFax before New Teacher Boot Camp. Technical and HR staff will be available to help support that process. Many of our administrative assistants have already received laptops if they did not have one to support new student registration and financial operations. And the remainder of our administrative assistants will receive devices to support their telework options. We'll also be providing used iPads to staff at various scales, including food service, bus drivers, and attendants, and extended day custodians and maintenance technicians. This way we can ensure that every employee, except for our hourly employees, will have an APS-issued device. We are excited that Microsoft Teams is also working with us to help some enhancements needed as we focus on education, and that's a lot of feedback we've been getting from our teachers. And Microsoft Teams is working again with IS. I want to thank them. Now, a couple of the enhancements that we will see is teachers can now see their entire class on the screen. They'll be able to see 49 different individuals, and we don't have any class sizes of 49, but they'll be up to 49, where previously they could not see that many. Teachers will also be able to decide if they want students to start the class without them, wait in the lobby or until the teacher starts the class, and also making sure how we can work with groups, student groups, etc. One thing we have missed with our remote work is access to a telephone. And so we're making some telephone services available now through our Office 365 environment. So employees also will be able to, if they don't have an APS-issued telephone, can be able to use it through there. Thinking about our internet service, this program, as we've mentioned in many previous times, is a partnership that I want to thank the Arlington County government for. They provided $500,000 in CARES Act funds to provide free internet access for eligible APS families. Families sign up for the essentials with Comcast and use an APS-provided code, and then the bill comes to APS. Also, I'm excited to announce that this is new information that our adult ed program students are also going to receive Comcast internet and also our Arlington Education and Employment and GED program students, as they work to obtain and complete their diploma, will now be able to, if they qualify, receive access. We started with our summer school students, providing codes to 1,636 families. Some families have already received the equipment. In the next phase, we'll be mailing flyers to all of our APS families to raise awareness of the program. This will occur in early August, along with our outreach channels like School Talk. And we recognize that some families may not notice the letters, and so schools will be working to reach out to those families to help direct them and assist them with the application. We're partnering with Arlington County government on additional technical support, and we're getting some feedback from our summer experience on the challenges families are facing with the application process. So schools are working with families as we work to find solutions that will make it easier for families. We won't be eliminating our MiFi program. Some families may not qualify the Internet Essentials, or some families are 2 families in one household, and the Comcast Internet Essentials only provides recognizes one family for the address, so we may need to provide more MiFi. So we're going to continue with that, and we're learning from some of the challenges here and working through those for our families. So please let us know if there are additional concerns, but again, this is a work in progress, and I'm really pleased and thankful for all the work IS has done. There is also a significant amount of work happening on operations, and our operations work groups and our activities group have been working on this. Childcare, of course, is an area of need that we continue to work on, and so I'm going to start there with a few updates. We know that this is a major question and need that we've been working very hard to ensure, both for staff and for families. I want to talk about for staff first. We are working on a plan where we will be able to provide childcare for APS teachers and staff at a cost, utilizing existing extended day staff. Childcare in this program would be provided at designated school facilities only for children ages 4 to 11 due to our licensing requirements. The cost for childcare services will be based on the demand and staffing requirements. Based on the teacher and staff surveys, we've seen 1,249 children listed there as being projected to need childcare. However, some of those children may be below age 4 or above age 11, so that might not be the exact, and that's just who's indicated that they may need support, and maybe not necessarily that they will take part in our program. Children will be brought into very small groups in designated facilities with designated staff. Of course, we'd have safety measures and social distancing, health screenings conducted prior to entering the buildings, face coverings required, etc. We're exploring the feasibility of how we provide childcare in each of our phases and our different instructional models. And this is an active, ongoing discussion that we're working on, and we recognize it's a pressing issue. More details on this and the decision, what that will look like for each of those phases, we'll be providing. And I'm glad we'll have the additional work session on August 13th so we can continue to provide, because, again, this is a major work in progress. As we think about our supporting our families, we are working closely with our county and our partners in the community to assess and understand the child care needs of our families. We're also looking into potential partner providers and private centers with the county to make some options available. This may take longer for us, though, than our other information about how we're using extended day staff, because of the need for providers to potentially meet licensing requirements or other things that may need to happen. And so we'll continue to provide more updates on this as new information is available. So again, childcare is pressing and a concern, and it's something we're still in the middle of working on. Just wanted to provide a few updates on our thinking, some of the challenges, and where we're going next. Athletics is another huge question for our families in our community. Recently, the Virginia High School League voted this past Monday 34-1 to adopt the third model that they had for reopening sports and activities for the upcoming school year. So that plan and their model involves delaying all sports seasons to a condensed schedule, which would tentatively start December 14th for winter sports and end on June 26th with spring sports. APS varsity sports will remain in their identified season. All varsity sports, APS and VHSL, will be held in the season as identified by the VHSL decision. It's important to note that there are some sports, dance, cheer, rifle, etc., which are not VHSL sports but are considered by APS as varsity sports. So we have to be clear that we're aligning every APS varsity sport to that same VHSL decision. The condensed interscholastic plan leaves the opportunity to play all sports in all 3 seasons open if Virginia moves beyond Phase 3 and/or Phase 3 guidelines from the state are revised and high-risk activities are allowed. Outdoor conditioning continues at our 3 high schools to support students' physical and mental fitness, as an APS understands greatly that that's a benefit for those students. And participation has been very successful with over 1,500 total participants in more than 80 sessions that include 13 sports and over 30 teams. So I want to thank all of our staff who've been helping to make that happen. School staff are also, because of this, going to work on how we can engage students in virtual clubs and virtual activities to keep students engaged as we wait on how we can re-engage via this decision here for VHSL. Additionally, please note that the August marching band camp has been canceled due to those same reasons and concerns. And of course, marching band course instruction won't be canceled. That's taking place virtually. Another big issue on operations, employees unable to telework. We are currently developing a plan for employees that cannot carry out their regularly assigned duties via telework but have a regular schedule and pay. Employees in these groups are by the following: food service, if not all of them are involved in food distribution, many of them will be, but not all. Bus drivers and attendants. While we're in our virtual distance learning, we will obviously not be transporting students on buses. Extended day for those that are not involved in childcare. And any of our custodians that may not be needed to report every day while we're in virtual. Again, these are all while we're in virtual settings. We honor and value all of our employees, and to strive and retain them as an excellent workforce during these unprecedented times, I am recommending that we continue to pay these employees throughout the first quarter of the school year, which ends on November 2nd, while we assess our long-term needs based on the changing situation and whether or not we return in hybrid. The estimated cost to keep these employees on board is as follows: $768,000 estimated per pay period, or for the first quarter, $3,072,000. Bus drivers and attendants are already included in the fiscal year 21 adopted budget, so that is not additional. Those costs are related to our extended day and our food service employees who were in the adopted budget. However, they're in the adopted budget based upon the fees that we will be receiving to help pay for their salaries and their cost. This cost, again, as I've said, may be partially reduced for those who may provide childcare and meals. Fees would help us cover the cost of staff providing childcare. Revenue and federal reimbursement will recover the cost of the food service staff working to provide meals to students. So this amount here is the highest it could be. But again, for those that are providing childcare and those that are providing meals, this number would be slightly less. Our goal is to find possibilities for these staff to work to help us meet the student and family needs while we're in full distance learning. And so here's some of the possible areas that we're focusing on, how they might help us. Provide direct support to students and families related to access and engagement. I've already mentioned childcare. Help provide some of those virtual social learning student activities. And so we're working on this, and we will be sending a communication to all of our impacted staff that I've mentioned next week to clarify the plans and the next steps. Now, as we've been working hard on all these different things, it's important to note that we are going to incur costs during closure to COVID-19, costs that were not anticipated when the fiscal year 21 budget was adopted, with new expenditures that are becoming as a result of these plans and changes. This slide details estimated costs and revenue losses due to the closure, and we're gathering this information in order to help inform our community and the county, and working together with our county to help find a way in how we can fund this. As you can see, the losses from not operating extended day through October 2020, combined with aquatics, building use, and Medicaid, is significant at a $4.5 million projection. Additional health and safety needs for PPE and supplies and personnel to help with taking temperatures and those types of things, total $5.9 million. You can also see technology needs have been and will continue to be significant at $1.15 million. As I've mentioned in the previous slides, the devices for our pre-K2 students were part of that. They're not included in this because those were covered by CARES Act funding. The technologies here includes other tech needs such as keypads for our middle school students, expansion of software licenses, and the telephony functionality for our staff. Instructional needs you see here are printing and translation, virtual high school courses, and additional staffing needs in several areas that you can see, which would be helping to support our students in our IEP process, our bilingual family health resource assistance. We've also staffed up with additional social workers to support students in the summer. And we do have additional funding related to, as you can see here, concerns for translations, for messaging directly related to operations during the pandemic. As I mentioned, food service staff pay through the first quarter will be part of this, depending on how many are not providing that service directly. So all totaling an estimated $12.6 million. These numbers are based on current information and are certainly subject to change and will change as we see. We are waiting for two big pieces of information at this time: the state revenue projections and the county revenue projections. We hope to have the state projections in August or possibly early September, depending on when the General Assembly reviews and revises the budget. We will not have the county projections until October or beginning of November. Once we have both of those projections, we'll have a better picture of our situation for this year, and that's when we will have to make some significant budget decisions on how to revise and balance our fiscal year 21 budget. Figures listed on the previous slides are estimates based on the information that is available at this time, as I've said. They're very subject to change. Our cost of paying extended day staff to the first quarter is reflected in the revenue loss category, and costs will be reduced by those who do provide childcare. I've said this a few times, but I think it's important to repeat it as this is new. Fees charged will cover those costs if they're available. Costs of paying food service staff for the first quarter, as I mentioned, is in the other category, and they will be reduced by the meals that they're providing and where we receive revenue from federal reimbursements. So again, a work in progress here. Critical missing pieces from the state and the county, and as we work through our final plans on what those needs will be, and we're learning of new needs as we go through this process. This slide details the next steps and upcoming dates in planning. I will continue, as always, to keep sending the Tuesday messages and providing additional information through our Engage page. And again, that's really an important process for us, and we're going to encourage our community to use that. The next time we'll have a public report will be at our work session on August 13th. And that, Madam Chair and school board members, concludes this monitoring report. And I'm happy to answer questions and comments, and I have staff here available as well who'll be able to help with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duran, for that very detailed and informative report. With that, I'd like to, I believe that we'll have several questions from my colleagues, and so I'd like to invite Mr. Goldstein to begin with 2 questions, and then we'll move along and give each member an opportunity to ask 2 questions, and we'll go through the necessary rounds. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Dr. Duran and the staff who've been working very hard on this and have pulled together again another very fact-filled and meaty briefing, which I appreciate. So I've got 4 questions. I'm going to start with 2 easy ones. When you come back to me, I'll do the other 2. First one's actually a suggestion, and that is, I know you post these presentations after you announce them at the board meetings. If you could possibly spell out the acronyms and the letter scale labels before you post it. I know there are a lot of people, hanging on every word here to know what the new information is, who maybe don't understand, what X scale is or G scale or something like that. So that's the first, is the suggestion. And the other is that the briefings and the documents that are discussed at the Return to School Task Force meetings that go on Mondays, can we put those on the APS website so that all the community members can stay up to date with what the task force topics and activities are? I met with some parents last night, and I think, I know some of them were speaking earlier this evening at the comment session, who are anxious to engage with us and help, and feel like they don't know, what the latest developments are in progress in certain areas, and have been searching the website for that kind of information. So I know the task force briefings and other documents and stuff are every week the latest information that we've got, and I think this would be a good way to keep the community up to date. So those are my two things for this round, and if you come back to me, I've got two other questions. Thank you.
Sure. In response to your first question, I'll definitely make sure we go back, and if there's any acronyms that we need to spell out, we'll be sure to do that. In terms of our task force, we do have a presentation that we provide to them that they review and discuss, and we have an actual spot on the website under the task force, an actual task force website webpage, excuse me. So we can provide those presentations after the task force has seen them and discussed them there, and I'll work with Catherine Ashby and Community Relations to make that happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. Now I'd like to turn to Ms. Talento. Ms. Talento.
Thank you, Ms. O'Grady. I actually have a few questions, but I'll start with, I think, two, as you requested. Dr. Dudon, I had heard concerns about iPads maybe not being able to support the full use of the Teams program. Can you confirm or verify or clarify if that is the case? Will our students who use laptops, will they be able to see all of their classmates with the new Teams platform? Are there challenges with our iPads accessing Microsoft Teams in a similar way that someone who's on a laptop can access Microsoft Teams?
I'm going to ask our Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Services, Raj, to answer that question and provide you some more details as he's working on those devices and making sure we have that access for our students, so he can provide some more clarity on that.
Thank you.
Sure. Good evening. The basic functionality of Teams meetings is the same for iPads and laptops. I just wanted to actually do that because it kind of supports both of the synchronous and asynchronous learning functions that are needed. Microsoft tends to release the new features supported on a laptop client sooner than the iOS clients. There's a lag between the availability of these features that definitely is there, but there's also a fundamental difference in the nature of the tablets versus the laptop, but the functionality is definitely available, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Adustamili. And can I just clarify that you said there's a lag time between releasing the updates, but they won't have any issues being able to see their classmates and their teachers and engaging?
Yes,
okay.
they can definitely, they can do all of the functions that they actually are doing right now with respect to the sharing the screens, being able to actually access the whiteboards, being able to have the present themselves or present the information or present it to the whole class if they were to be given as an opportunity by the teacher. And the other way it's also true is that the teacher can also control that functionality as well. So all of that functionality is definitely available.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then my next question is regarding the internet. And first, I want to just share with everyone that I am extremely grateful for our partnership with the county and Comcast on providing internet essentials to our community. And I think it's wonderful that we've been able to do that. But as this has been rolling out, I do have some concerns about the fact that as you know, we're learning more about the program, that Internet Essentials turns out only provides 25, and I don't know if I have the acronym spelled right, megabytes per second, with an upload speed of 3, and that's about as far as I know what I'm saying. So anything further in that technical piece, I'm not going to try to explain that. But what I do know that means is that it's a much slower speed than the general consumer that the general consumer accesses. I think that the normal speed now today is 50 MPS, and that's considered low. Many consumers have over 100 MPS. And so I worry about a family who has multiple children being able to stream at the same time their classes. And is that really something that we're going to be able to, or that families will actually be able to access? I don't want us to feel like confident that we're providing internet and then we're still having challenges. So I wanted to share that concern and see if there was any feedback. And I also wanted to add on to that one of the other challenges that I'm hearing is if you subscribe to Comcast today and you do not have an Internet Essentials package, even if you qualify for free and reduced lunch, in order for you to get the APS program, you have to cancel your subscription. And then the expectation that Comcast has is that you'll wait 90 days before you try to reapply. And so that would be 90 days without families having an internet. I know that these are things we'll have to work through, but I want to make sure that we are aware of it, to make sure that we are triaging it. Can we work with Comcast to get a higher speed for these families, help them understand that 90 days without internet is not really helpful. And then maybe look at, while we mitigate these potential barriers, can we get additional Wi-Fi's for these families who may have multiple children, even if they have internet essentials? And do we have any luck in increasing the data access on Wi-Fi's? I know we talked about that this spring. I know we were working through, and before I let you answer, Mr. Adusmili and Dr. Don, I just want to thank you and your team for the excellent work and collaboration you've been doing with the county. It really is extraordinary. I know that we continue to provide requests and concerns, but I think we have to note that we are moving forward and we're trying to close this digital gap. And I know that your team, and under Dr. Donmuir's leadership and even under Ms. Johnson's leadership, it was something that we've been focusing on since we closed. So I just want to acknowledge that, but see if you have any thoughts or feedback on the concerns that I've shared.
Thank you, Ms. Chalento, and I'll let Mr. Adusmili respond to that. And again, I want to echo what you said, but he and his team have been working very hard on this, and he and I talk often about it, and I would check with him, and every time I check, he's already got ahead of some of the challenges that are coming, and there are some challenges, so I appreciate you asking them. And Mr. Adusmili, if you can share some of those.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Duran. And just want to share something. Is based on our basic calculation, I think the 25 megabit download speed actually supports 3 students with respect to video streaming. That's what we've actually calculated, and we've been very conservative about that. And so that if you stretch it, it goes to 5, but we don't want to actually say it's 5. It's definitely 3. But we do want to understand that there are other factors in the multi-12 conditions, family conditions, that could actually impact that one. We've actually experienced this, and we learned this directly from the summer school administrators who we have been talking to on a regular basis, actually, and I'm very thankful for their input as well, Mr. Lento. So there is definitely a plan. We have actually discussed this with Comcast. Number one, Comcast has been a great partner, and we've actually been discussing all of the issues we've been experiencing on almost a weekly basis. And we've actually been doing that with the county partnership as well. So it's definitely there, and we're taking it to that, and we are actually discussing all possibilities. But there is always a plan B, I think, which is our MiFi program that Dr. Duran actually mentioned. It is definitely going to continue, and we are working with Kajit to make sure that the bandwidth limitation which we experienced in March with the MiFi is something that we are able to address. I think the real driver for us here would be to move as many families as possible to Comcast Internet Essentials and actually limit the number of users using MiFi, and then actually bumping up the quality of the MiFi program so that they're getting a better experience with respect to the holistic student experience at the end of the day is really our goal. So definitely wanted to mention that. Like you said, the 90-day waiting period is definitely a Comcast policy. They've actually talked about it, but we are in communication with Comcast directly because we are actually telling these are special situations, these are exceptions, and then we are actually taking every case that we're learning from summer school administrators on a case-by-case basis back to Comcast. And we are discussing what are the possibilities with each case. Comcast themselves have actually a few kind of combination programs that are not properly, I wouldn't say properly or publicly publicized, but they actually have programs to support families in this condition to retain the existing Xfinity network with a reduced cost model. That is one thing that we've been trying to talk to back and forth between the families and Comcast. That's definitely one. And there were some scenarios that we've actually experienced when there are multiple families in the same place that we are able to discuss that with them on a one-to-one basis. So it's a combination of a lot of things, but I wanted you to understand, one, MyFi's program is available. We are continuing to support that. We are continuing to talk about increasing the limitations capacity so that we don't have limitations. We're working with Comcast on every exception we've actually learned so far so that they're aware of it, and they're giving us a workaround to that particular one. We are the first in Virginia to actually have this program, and we are actually ironing out quite a few details through the process with that. That's definitely the second thing I want to say. And we'll continue to do this. I hope I've answered your question there, man.
No, you did. Thank you. I really just want to make sure you all were aware what I'm hearing in the community about a lot of our families, that we have plans to mitigate and support our students, because I really want to make sure that everyone has access as when we start school. So thank you so much, Mr. Dusman, and thank you, Dr. Down, really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talento. I'd like to now turn to Ms. Van Dorn for 2 questions in this round.
I'm sorry, I was trying to find my mic. Thank you very much. First, I want to thank Dr. Duran and the entire APS staff for the phenomenal work that you're doing. One day we will look back on this and look at all the things we learned, and it's going to have been a painful but an incredible time of growth for all of us. So thank you for all of this work. It's recognized by everybody, by our entire community. So I have a really, really complicated question, and it has a lot of component parts. And I have sent this message to you and my colleagues. So I'm going to raise the topic, and I will start to ask the question, but it is one with many component parts. The topic is the budget for 2021. And I'm extremely concerned that we don't have enough money to function next year without going into our reserves and beyond. And as you know, by law, we must balance our budget and not go into the red. And there are certain areas, food service and extended day, that are self-funded, that we are not allowed to fund with our operating dollars, our education dollars. So I'm making some statements, and please correct me if I'm wrong when I'm done. I'm more than happy to hear the answer to the question. So given that at the end of last year, Interim Superintendent Cynthia Johnson and the staff closed a gap that was made up of both a reduction in revenue and a reduction in operating expenses, $30 million in operating expenses and $10 million in revenue. So we closed a gap of $40 million, and we did that partly by using half of our reserves. So we only have about $12 million left in our reserves. So my question is, we are going into the fall. We don't know how long this is going to last. We do know that those two, extended day and food service, which we need revenue to offset, we don't know if we're getting that revenue. You have some plans to offset it if we provide childcare and if we can get funds for food. But as of August 19th, people are on contract with us. We are, I believe, not supposed to be funding those expenses out of our operating fund. So what are we going to do about our funding for these areas? Are we, and I don't believe we can, use our reserves? And then that leads me to my big question I understand in listening to town halls and meetings I've been in with the county that they have a $10 million surplus of reserve COVID funds, CARE Act funds. And have we, and Dr. Duran and Ms. O'Grady, have we given them a letter explaining the financial situation we're in and asking them to help us, particularly with these difficult costs that we cannot use existing education dollars to cover? And I will end by saying it is absolutely essential that we keep our staff on board so that the minute we can reopen, they can go to work. We can't lose our extended day staff and we can't lose our food service staff. So the big question is, have you asked the county for some money to help us get through this period? And what are we going to do to fund these areas?
Thank you, Ms. Van Doren. I'll start with the second one, and then I'm going to ask Assistant Superintendent Leslie Peterson to help with some of the first question. But yes, we have asked and we have shared this exact chart with the county. Recently, we've met with them, with our joint county leadership. Chair O'Grady and Vice Chair Dr. Cannon were there, and we provided them with the exact thing that you're seeing now and had a discussion about our needs and concerns. And the county said that they understood and they were going to work with us, and they wanted to make sure, particularly the health and safety aspect. They said, you need to make sure the health and safety are primary, and so continue to work on that, and we will find ways to support you. Again, a major part in being able to make a final commitment on that was the end of October, November, when they'll be able to have a better sense of their own revenues that they're receiving. And so that will be something that we were told yesterday with our county, is we continue the conversation, keep letting them know. And they were very thankful of the specific details that you saw on this chart that they saw this week. And I'll defer to Chair O'Grady or Dr. Cannon if you want to add, since you were in that same meeting. But that was essentially yes, a big yes to your second question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran. Yes, in our regularly scheduled joint leadership meetings with the chair and the vice chair of the county board and the county manager, we were able to share that information, and we were able to express to them our concerns about meeting our budgetary requirements, and they are listening, and I believe they will take that back to the rest of their board, and we will continue that conversation because we know that it is imperative for us moving forward to meet the needs of our students. Dr. Cannon, would you like to add?
So could I get the answer to my other question, please?
Yes, I was just, we're answering the second one first. I want to see if Dr. Cannon wanted to add to that. And then I'm going to.
I do want to, and I want to, I really do want to double down on what Ms. Van Doren said. We did share this information with the county, absolutely. However, the fact is they felt their timeline led them to understanding more about their numbers in October because of the real estate taxes. Meanwhile, we're going into this beginning of the school year with this expected $12 million deficit. So I think what Ms. Van Doren is concerned about, and I share that concern, I think we all do, is, we are not making reductions right now to balance that first quarter budget. And if the county cannot come through, and again, I mean, they're getting CARES funding and some other revenue sources, but we also have to be aware that if none of that works out well, we're starting off with this deficit that we will then have to make choices ourselves to figure out how to balance. I mean, we just have to be realistic about how this could play out depending on what happens with the county. We have asked the question. We've made the request, and we do not know at the moment. They have a lot of uncertainties, and we simply do not know what they're going to be able to provide. But they indicated they wanted to be collaborative.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Cannon, for sharing your thoughts about the meeting, and I would agree that there was an interest in collaboration as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to go back to Dr. Duran so he can answer your other question.
Ms. Peterson, can you help provide some more thoughts on Ms. Van Doren's first question? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Ms. Van Doren brings up a great question, and I'm sure that board members have heard me express some concern over the course of the last several months about where we are with our budget. The reality is that we are in a very, very different situation than we have ever found ourselves in previously. We are all kind of making this up as we go along, and the priority has been to try to keep staff and to provide the best for our students and families that we can. So we're kind of expending money prior to deciding whether or not we have the budget for it. So we are going to be having to make some decisions in the near future about how we're going to fund all of this. I can't tell you how we're going to do that right now. I don't even have the biggest pieces of information that I need to try to even put something together, because I don't have state revenue projections and I don't have county revenue projections at this point. I do know what our expenses are going to look like over the next several months and through the year with the projections that you were provided this evening. So we are going to have to start looking at that. As I've said many, many times, our business is a people business. 90% of the school operating fund is made up of salaries and benefits. So if we need to make changes, it's going to have to be in that area, and those are going to be some hard decisions.
Thank you. I just want to close this by saying that I have a request to the board chair and Dr. Duran to put that funding request in writing to the board, to the county board, so we can close at least the first quarter gap with our known gap in the area in which we know we will not have revenue to offset in monies that we cannot use from the general fund. We have to make it clear that the county has to help us, and we need to ask all of our citizens to support that. And I would like to see that in writing to them so that it's a public request for the aid we need for the first quarter. We have to keep our staff on hand for when we open the schools. Thank you. I feel very strongly about this, and I also think it's unconscionable that we have to wait till the end of October when we know those funds are going to go out our door, some of which I'll ask as my third question, if it's even legal for us to do it for those employees who we can't offset. Thank you. I'm very worried about this, and we have a great staff. I want to keep them on board.
Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. I appreciate your concern in this area. I have made a note that you've requested that a formal letter go to the county board, and I will talk to the rest of our colleagues regarding that request. And with that, I would like to turn to Vice Chair Cannon. Dr. Cannon?
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Dr. Duran. Again, we're every time you come to share with us our reopening plans, we're getting more and more details, more and more planning is happening, and we can also tell that you're reading emails, because a lot of what people are asking about and recommending, is coming into the work as well. So this is all headed in the right direction. I just want to ask a couple of things. First, I want to talk about the child care piece very quickly. I'm sure that those who were watching you and were focused on this issue caught it, because they're focused on this issue, but I think you made a big announcement in this PowerPoint that you kind of did quickly, which is that we are going to provide, I think you said, that we are planning to provide childcare for our staff.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a big decision. That's new, I think, as of tonight in terms of our public presentation, and that's very important. I also then wanted to ask if you could clarify where we are in terms of thinking about any other childcare. I think it's probably the case that in the distance learning beginning of the school year, I think you're implying by looking at the budget that we're not going to be providing any form of extended day, and at what level do we know or not know about extended day? Are we considering opening that up as we reopen schools, or is that not even on the table?
If I think I heard your question correctly, you're asking about extended day when we're in hybrid or in person? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, or what do you see as sort of the trajectory? Again, there are parents who are wondering,
Yeah,
if they can rely on extended day. What do you see in terms of when we might consider opening extended day?
We have not had extensive discussion, so I don't have any detailed response to give on that right at this moment. We've been looking at providing childcare and support during the day, primarily for staff, as was mentioned, and then also working with the county for how we can provide options for families. And we have not really discussed in detail about extended day per se once we return in the fall, but that would be something that our work groups would be working on. And so I can definitely provide more information on that as they get some more detailed plans.
Yeah, I think people are, as we heard from speakers, there's a lot of concern about childcare. So I just wanted to clarify where we are with those pieces. Was that 2 questions then?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so.
All right.
We'll come back to you if you have additional questions, Dr. Cannon. And thank you. And I would like to ask 2 questions as well before we go back to Mr. Goldstein. Dr. Duran, I wanted to ask you about any additional funding that we may see that may be coming in from the state. We do have a very disturbing deficit that we're looking at. I do believe I heard that we may be receiving, the state may be distributing the second half of its CARES funding, and didn't know whether or not we were going to anticipate seeing any additional funding from that. And then the next question I wanted to ask you is about your statement about keypads for middle school students. I know that I believe we had put in a pilot program for keypads for 6th graders. Is this going to be additional keypads? And will that happen? Is that definitely going to happen, or is that budget depending? Thank you.
So first question is, the state did distribute second phase of the CARES Act fund, but did not come to the school system. That went to the county, and they did receive some additional funding from that this week. Or they notification. I don't know if they've received the funding yet, but they did receive notification of that. So that second wave was for the county, not the school system. So the only additional possible CARES funding of any kind is what's currently being discussed in Congress and in the Senate about, but that's not been voted on yet in terms of what we might receive there. There's been a lot of discussions about what it could be, different amounts, but that's not nothing that's final in any way. In terms of the keypads, yes, there was in the budget previously for rising 6th graders to have those, and now we're expanding that for 7th and 8th grade students, since we're now going full distance learning, and that's included in here in terms of the technology line as part of the additional costs.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I'd like to circle back around to Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein, I think you said you had 2 additional questions. This round, again, will allow each of us to have up to 2 additional questions. Thank you.
Excuse me. I do. Thank you very much. So for the past 15 years, our enrollment in September has been higher than the previous June. But because of the unusual circumstances we find ourselves in now, that may not be happening. I believe we were projecting an enrollment increase of about 1,000 students starting in September over the number that we had in the last school year. So first, when will we see the actual enrollment numbers for the fall? And I know, they change throughout the summer, particularly in August, as people recognize and realize that they have to be registering, for the upcoming start of school. But my big question is, how are we going to reconcile staffing for a potentially lower enrollment, given that teachers have already been offered their contracts? For the past 15 years, the problem has been, where do we find extra teachers to meet the rising enrollment? If our enrollment isn't rising, if it's flat, or even if it's declining, how are we going to reconcile that with staffing?
Your first question about when we'll see the actual enrollment numbers, that will still be the September 30th, the normal time that we've had in the past. So that's when we will see the enrollment numbers for the fall. And Assistant Superintendent Dan Redding, I will ask you to help provide some more insight on the second one about reconciling staffing given the enrollment numbers when we do see them at September 30?
All right. We're actually currently throughout the summer meeting as a contingency staffing committee, and that involves staff from finance and budget, planning and evaluation, the Department of Teaching and Learning, and Human Resources. And we review weekly updates on grade level enrollments at the elementary level and grade level enrollments at secondary, and compare using the planning factors. Does the staffing that's needed based on actual enrollment match what was provided in the budget? Or do they need fewer teachers, or do they need additional teachers? And actually, through the month of July, we've been watching very carefully, and we've started reaching out to principals in situations where schools are significantly under-enrolled in certain grade levels. And the history does not show that by the end of September that they have additional students registering at those grade levels to meet the need to have that number of teachers. So if they need 100 students to have 6 teachers at, I'm just gonna make this up, at 3rd grade, and they currently have 85, and they have 6 teachers in place because that was budgeted, we are reaching out to those principals, especially if the history doesn't bear out that they get 15 additional registrations in that grade level. And we are saying we're going to have to take that extra position and move it to a school that is understaffed. So we do have schools that have additional students in several grade levels, and we are taking staff from schools that are under-enrolled and shifting that staffing to schools that do require additional staffing, and that prevents us from taking staffing funds from our contingency account.
Okay. That actually what I was referring to when I said actual enrollment numbers was the weekly enrollment numbers over the summer, which historically we've seen every summer, starting around this time, the end of July, and seeing the progression, which, as I said before, has always gone up from the previous June. So my second question is related to the first, and that is about the higher class sizes that were approved in the FY21 budget. And is that going to necessitate staffing reductions, possibly given a lower enrollment profile?
Well,
enforcing class size numbers, these higher class size numbers in a virtual environment is going to result in a very difficult situation for teachers who are unaccustomed to virtual teaching. So
a couple parts to that, and I'll have Assistant Superintendent Redding help with this as well. But after the fiscal year 21 budget was adopted with the higher class sizes, there were adjustments that were made at that time to staffing. And Assistant Superintendent Redding can provide some more detail, but that already did occur right after the budget was adopted. And then your second question about following up on the virtual environment, and I'll let Mr. Redding talk about that as well.
All right. So basically, in the spring after the board adopted their budget based on the revisions, that it did include class size increases. That triggered a surplus process where, as numbers were done, as formulas were calculated for planning factors to say you have 100 students at 2nd grade, you need 5 teachers. As that was done for every school, Human Resources balanced that against the existing staffing in each school, and we used the seniority process to surplus the least senior staff members at that school in each category. So all of that class size adjustment has already been factored in. Staff were surplused and placed at schools that had open positions. Your second question was related to class size in the virtual environment. Is that correct?
Yeah. The higher class sizes, but I think I heard that after the budget was adopted in early May, that the reality of those higher class sizes then was worked into the calculation for the number of staff who would be necessary, and then surplus, as you said, or reallocated. But we're looking at now a potential situation where our enrollment in September is equal to or less than what we had in June. So, like I said before, every other September we've been trying to find additional teachers because enrollment's been going up. What do we do if enrollment's not going up?
So I know we would continue to work through this contingency process and looking at the school by school and grade by grade enrollments through even into September and October. We were doing this last year. We are aware in some neighborhoods and some schools' attendance boundaries that there are buildings, high density residential housing being opened up, and that is affecting the staffing at a couple of our schools where they are enrolling students as families are moving in. That will impact our staffing. Right now, it actually looks like as things are trending that we're okay. We're going to just continue to monitor enrollment as we go forward. But as you shared, we haven't been in a situation in the last 15 or so years where there's been a decline. And right now, I don't believe we're seeing the decline reflected in our enrollment numbers in Synergy. We're monitoring that, though.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. I appreciate that. And I'd like to turn to Ms. Talento for up to 2 more additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady. I want to start with a few comments. One, I just want to note that I understand we do have families registering this summer. We just got our registrars not too long ago set up to work from home and so forth, and they've been working hard, but I do know we're still having some challenges. Not all families have printers to register their families, and not all phones have PDF capability where you can fill out the PDF form through a telephone. So I just want to provide some feedback that we look into whether we need to provide our registrars stamps and envelopes to mail hard copies to families for registration. What is the lag time? I just want to make sure that as Mr. Goldstein mentioned these questions, that we are also making sure that our office is able to register everyone who is trying to register, because one, that was delayed. In the spring, I believe that was delayed and postponed. We were telling families to wait. I think we recently opened up, but we had to get our registrars who did not have laptops so they could telework. And then we now have challenges as we're trying to implement that system. From what I'm hearing in the community, there are challenges like families not having printers to print out registration forms, people not having email set up, leaving messages. I'm not sure what the turnaround time is on phone calls. And I know that our registrars are working very hard. I don't want my suggestions and comments to come across as though I don't think they're working. I know that they are behind based on the fact we have to postpone that. But I do think to the extent that we can support them and support our families to ensure that our registrations do get caught up and that families know they can register again, I think that would be really helpful. The other thing I want to comment on is childcare. And I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Zidam, for acknowledging that we will have to consider how we manage the childcare arrangements that we're looking at as we transition into our phased hybrid model, assuming all that goes as planned. And the question that I have regarding that is, and I want to preface it by saying I, as one board member, strongly support the decision to open virtually for a variety of reasons, many of which were discussed at our last board meeting, some mentioned today, and there are many more. But I do also want to acknowledge that we have constituents who are advocating for us to open schools and believe that opening schools and having our students in school buildings is better for students than having them learn virtually. And I was hoping you could help acknowledge our ability to be able to provide childcare in our facilities and what that might look like compared to actual virtual learning. From my perspective, I think it has to do with the significantly reduced number of students that we're providing childcare, which we're looking, I think you had mentioned in a slide, between 1,000 and 2,000, but we don't know if all will attend, versus trying to open up schools for 14,000 to 28,000 students, and recognizing that in childcare we have limited use of facilities, where if we were bringing students in full day, we would have multiple classrooms in use. We might have class transition times, but I think it's important to just acknowledge that conversation that is happening in the community. I know board members will get questioned and asked, why are you providing childcare facilities, but we're not opening hybrid? So if you can talk a little bit about that, I would really appreciate it. And then Ms. O'Grady, I do have another question.
So your first comment, definitely will take back that information to look at our registration process and see how we can make sure we're supporting our families that are having access. It's really the key in terms of being able to fill out the forms and whatnot. So you're absolutely right. When we think about childcare and the opportunity to provide it for our employees, particularly in our first phase to do that, it has to look very different. And it's not the same as providing school for our students. It's very small groups, designated staff in only designated facilities. It's not going to be in every single facility we have. And we have to make sure that we're following, again, the safety guidance about the masks and the health screenings. And so it is a balance, delicate balance. We're looking at how we can do that. And so as I indicated in my comments, we're still actively discussing that, and we're trying to figure out what does that look like. But it would be very different in the sense of the number and the locations and our ability, because remember, one of the factors that I indicated for our criteria to return in person is the ability for staff and students to have the sufficient number to provide the safe space for that. So that's the key difference there, I think, is the small groups, the designated facilities, the designated staff, and then making sure we're able to do that and not having it everywhere and opened up fully for the large number that we would need if it was in person. We wouldn't be able to do that safely at this time, and so that's why we're not reopening our schools at this time, because we're not able to do that number safely. How can we do this safely? We're still trying to figure that out, to be honest, in terms of the in-person during the virtual learning for employees that may need it. And the question of the 1,249 for our staff in those surveys was not during virtual. That was if you come back to hybrid and in person. So that number may be even really larger than if you're an employee who is actually going to be working virtually. You may not want to take your child to child care if you're going to be home with them. You may if you're teaching and want to have the opportunity to be able to focus on teaching all day. So that's still something that our work group is working through, but you're absolutely right. It is important to differentiate, and there is a difference in the size and the ability and the staffing that we have and the limited facilities that we'd be using.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zahn. I really appreciate that. I just wanted to be able to acknowledge all of the community members that we have. I'm asking some of these questions. And then, Ms. O'Grady, the next questions I have are really related to the budget slide. But I have a couple. I'm not sure how many rounds we're going to go, but if we don't get to all of them, I will provide a follow-up. I did want to ask regarding the table. We said and Dr. Duran, this is probably for Ms. Peterson, but I'll direct it to you, and then you can let me know how you want to have the question answered. In the table that was shared on the PowerPoint slide, it talks about having to understand what state and county revenue projections are. And I'm curious if in that estimated dollar amount need, do these figures assume the budgeted projected state and county revenues that we used in the spring when we adopted our budget? Are those calculated in there, or did we pull some of that out waiting to see what was going to come forward? And I ask that because if they are assumed in there and the state comes back and says we have lower revenues, therefore you're going to get less amount, would that deficit, projected deficit, if there are no other factors that change, potentially go up? And that's really what I'm trying to understand.
Ms. Peterson, if you can please respond. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. The line on the chart that says state and county revenue actually does refer exactly to what you just stated, Ms. Talento, that I am anticipating a revenue loss from the state.
Okay.
And I do not have any idea what that looks like at this time. So if we were to have a revenue loss from the state, which I fully anticipate, then a number would go on that line right there that says if the state revenue is reduced by $5 million, let's say, then $5 million would go on that line, and that total at the bottom would go up by $5 million. So we have not done anything with our budget. We have not revised the budget in any way at this time. We would bring that to you for approval if we were to do that. But without having some of the biggest pieces of the information, it's been a struggle to figure out where exactly we are. So that number will go up if the state does say that we will have less revenue than we had included in the school board's adopted FY21 budget.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. And Ms. O'Grady, I do want to just state, are we going to go another round, Ms. O'Grady, or are we stopping here?
We can go another round. I know this is a very important topic. So if other people, we'll definitely come back to you and anyone else if they have additional questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Then I'll save my comments for that final round. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries. I'd like to turn to Ms. Van Dorn. Ms. Van Dorn, any additional up to 2 questions?
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question for Dr. Duran, and I'm staying on the money because I think it's extremely critical right now. As I've said, we have paychecks that we need to send out on August 19th, which is the date on the contracts that we have with some of our employees, particularly the extended day and food service employees, who I think are in question right now. And I'm very concerned about that because I want to keep them on board. My question, Dr. Duran, is we have $12 million left in reserves. That's it. This deficit that you have presented to the county is $12.64 million, and that has some hard costs in terms of supplies and things. So of the funds that we need for our staffing, are we allowed, I'd like to know the answer to this question, for the extended day and food service, which are self-funded, are we allowed to use the operating funds that are in reserves, previously reserved operating funds, to fund those 2 self-funding areas as of January 19th?
As of August 19th, you mean?
August 19th, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm just making it clear that in 20 days we have to start paying people.
Ms. Peterson, can you help respond to that question, please? Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. The answer is that I have for you today is that I don't know the answer to that. I am checking through what has been put into the reserves previously to see where those funds came from, because I know that in prior years, the extended day program has run a surplus, and a lot of that surplus, all of that surplus has gone into the reserves. So I am working with our legal counsel to find an answer to those questions to see what we could do in order to provide the funding for that.
So a sub question to that is, we had a $3 million gap at the end of the last quarter in extended day. How was that funded?
I don't know the answer at this point because I don't have the final numbers for the closeout for last year. I'd have to take a look at where those figures fell and where the funding, where the expenditures and the revenue for extended day ended up the year.
Okay, but the likelihood that we're talking about millions of dollars to fund these 450, actually almost 600 positions, it's not likely, is it?
It's not likely.
Okay, thank you. That's what I'm trying to get at, and I'm trying to get our community and everybody to understand, is that we don't have the money to do what we need to do to keep our staff funded. We don't have that money. It is imperative that we make a request to the county board now for those funds. It's not something we should wait to October for. We cannot wait to know what the state is or isn't going to give us. We need some money. We need some stopgap money right now. So my second question is going to be to Ms. O'Grady. Thank you very much. And I hope you hear this as just ardent support for the hard work that you are all doing and the absolute critical need to keep our staff on board like the county is doing. They have not laid anybody off. We don't want to do that because we need to hit the deck running the minute school can reopen in whatever way it can reopen. We cannot lose our staff. We cannot. The county has a rainy day fund. It has reserves left over from CARES Act funding. We need some of that money. So my second question, Ms. O'Grady, and you can think about this for when you come around, I want us to write a letter and I want us to make it public and I want the community to know we need this money now. So I want to make a motion that we write that letter. So I want to know if you want me to do it at the end of this discussion or if you want me to do it under new business. That's my second question. Thank you. Whenever you're ready, you can give me the answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. I appreciate that, and I would ask you to offer that motion under new business, and we will be expecting it. Thank you. Next, I'd like to go to Vice Chair Cannon. Dr. Cannon?
Okay, thank you. I think I'm just going to ask one more question, and in light of, I think it was Ms. Talento's first round of questions where she was really describing all the work going into getting kids connected. And, we have a lot of that going on throughout our system, whether it's technology, it's other types of support, it's food, all sorts of ways that we have staff engaging to try to connect with our families. And we got an email, one of many emails this week was from the Randolph community where the PTA president wrote to us and talked about some, as she called them, extremely hardworking people in their building. It's a community that needs support, again, with that internet connectivity and understanding how to use Parent View and, on, and that the staff at some schools can really end up getting stretched and stressed because of, just trying to meet the needs of that community and get them ready for the first day of school. I was originally going to ask you just about whether we know we're going to have the resources to kind of, you can think it's almost like bottlenecks, right? Like there's just too many needs and only a few staffers. And so one question would be, are we going to be able to help out in those situations? But what I really want to ask then is, how are you going to know, Dr. Duran, of those situations? And I think, we have talked about culture and empowering staff. And at the end of the day, what we need, I think now this year more than we ever have, is for every, staff member, every school, everywhere in our system, being able to tell their supervisor that they need help, that they're overwhelmed, that that the needs of whatever they're doing are greater than what they're capable of doing. And how are we going to ensure that those folks can make that request? Because we can't help if we don't know where those bottlenecks are. So I'm just curious if this is anything you've thought about, if you are hearing anything from our staff about how to think about this, and kind of what your thoughts are on how we might be most helpful, especially for those schools where we have those high needs.
Yes, so we've heard a lot from many schools with high needs about needing support just to reach out to families and help direct them. And we have a lot of good systems in place, but families don't even know what those are, how to access them, where to go. They don't even know about Engage or about certain things. And so how do we help connect them? And really it was a request to think about actual manpower, people to actually sit there and help walk through, not necessarily individuals who will solve the problem, but help navigate the system for some families and help them through that. And that's why, if you saw on our slide on employees unable to telework, our number one way to repurpose some of those staff is to provide direct support in connecting families and students with access and engagement, and how we can help train them to support those schools that might need that. So that was one major thing we're thinking about as we move to this new distance learning for all, and the unknowns and the new systems that we're putting in place to support. How might we help with that? And so that was one way that we're thinking about. I think the other thing you raised is an important one about how do we ensure that there are systems for our leaders, our principals, our supervisors to be in contact with us about their needs and their concerns, and supporting them and opening up those avenues of communication. So we're working on some ways that we can enhance that and make sure that they're able to provide us that information. I think we've seen it in some ways, even just modeling on a very different level, of course, but the task force that we've had with different representatives have been able to give us their voice and perspective through some surveys, through meetings. Our principals have been working, for example, on the instructional model. They've been meeting regularly now in ways that they hadn't, providing us feedback on that. So creating opportunities and spaces for that coming together, that they hadn't come together before in that way. And then it's going to require additional human resources to help with some of those things. While we centrally set up good systems that need to be put in place and protocols and processes, we then have to be able to help families understand what those are and work through those and navigate them. And so we're going to need to train individuals to help us with that have the more direct contact than we do here at the central level.
So just as a quick follow-up then, and you mentioned some of those FTEs, some of those folks that don't, their normal job is not needed right now. You're actually sort of envisioning, once you understand where those needs might be, actually finding a way to deploy some of these folks
Yes.
to be of assistance out in the schools.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Virtually or, assisting. Absolutely, yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Grady.
Thank you, Dr. Cannonen, and I would like to just follow up a little bit on the conversation you just had with Dr. Duran. Dr. Duran, as we know that we're moving forward with, at this point, virtual learning. However, if it's safe enough for us to move back, and when it is safe enough for us to move back into hybrid learning, how important might some of the staff be that we've been talking about in terms of extended day, personnel? What role might they play in allowing us to safely return to some in-person instruction?
Well, one, being able to provide more social emotional student activities and those types of things is important. But two, when we think about our health, well, not necessarily one and two, but also thinking about some of our mitigation strategies that we need for health and safety and helping support that. How do we support the smaller class, sizes where we have to keep students 6 feet apart? How do we have them help with some of that potentially? So I think it's going to look a lot different when we come back in person through hybrid. And so what are some new ways that we need additional support in that way for our principals, our teachers, our students? But I think also it's really important for the extended day that how do we find opportunities to support through social emotional learning and activities?
Thank you very much. And as we can return, as we look to the eventual safe return to school, will we be, this is a follow-up, will we be changing some of our practices? If, for instance, if students need to come in the building, will we have staff to do temperature checks on buses, other things in that fashion? So that's a follow-up to my first question.
Absolutely. We will need additional, as we've looked at our health and safety measures, we have temperature checks, we have a certain amount of students that can come in and be in the hallway at a certain time, going to passing one another, et cetera, so in the office. So yes, there's going to be totally different strategies and protocols that we have to use.
Thank you very much. I only bring that up, I think, with the thought in mind of Ms. Van Dorn expressing her concern about being able to cover costs for some of our staff who know our students, and how we are going to move forward with potentially the need when we are looking at in-person instruction, the need to cover some of these additional requirements to be able to return safely while we are trying to figure out how to cover our costs, which are clearly put us in the red. Did you want to respond to that?
No, you're absolutely correct.
Thank you very much. And then for my second question, I wanted to go forward a little bit more on food distribution. You had mentioned, Dr. Duran, that when we move back towards, when we start again in person, that we're not looking at the summer food model, and that we may be looking at a way to distribute food. And is there anything else that you can add for that? Because I think it's going to be a little bit more complicated than it is currently, in that we're talking about synchronous learning and students actually experiencing learning in real time, and there may be a short time period where students have the opportunity to have lunch, and I'm not sure that they would have the opportunity and the time to come to our buildings to receive meals that they may be depending on.
Yes, we are looking at the possibilities of how, we don't have any definite yet, but of how we can potentially do delivery of food closer to students' homes and in areas, using our bus drivers, for example, and our buses if we're not using them. So those are things we're looking at, because you're right that there may be a need for families and students not be able to get to school, the actual school building while we're in our full distance learning. So that is something that the group is currently looking at. It's something that's different than we've done. As I said, we got to do things differently. We have to be innovative. We have to change our practices to meet the needs of our families. And so right now that is a possibility of a major planning that's going towards that possibility.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran. I appreciate that. I'd like to go around for what I'd like to be able to call a final round of questioning. We do have a very important information item that's coming up, and we understand that now we will have a new item in new business. So with that, I'd like to go back and circle around to see if Mr. Goldstein has a final question. Mr. Goldstein.
I have some minor clarifications that I will get answered offline. I'll yield my time to my colleagues who I know have other questions. I do want to say I appreciate this conversation. A lot of great topics raised. I want to add my voice of concern to the funding problem that I think Leslie put it very well. We cannot continue to spend money that we don't know where the revenue source for that money is going to be. So huge problem, as my colleagues have said, and I endorse that also. So no additional questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. Ms. Talento, I understand that you had additional questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair O'Grady. I have two final questions. The first one is I just want a clarifying point. I know that in this presentation, there are a couple places where you mentioned additional translations, and I just want to thank our team, Dr. Duran and your team, for understanding the need for translation into our 5 major languages for many of our community members who are not able to access the information as easily as others. So thank you for keeping us aware of that and being focused on it. But I know that per our DOJ agreement, we had to add money in our budget for translations. I think in the past we've had a translation line that I've never felt was very good. And I know that we were working on increasing, I think, a person because we were not able to provide translation services. And I believe we put that in our prior budget as well as for additional resources. I'm curious if, and I just want to confirm that in this table that was provided to us tonight, that's funding needed in addition to what we already allocated in our budget this spring. Is that correct?
That is correct. This is an addition for the operations that are directly connected to what's happening as we're reopening schools, so separate from that. So that is correct.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful. And then the last question I have, and then I have a comment, is Ms. Peterson, as we continue to process our financial needs and understanding how our budget is unfolding with the pandemic and the unexpected circumstances, expenditures, and losses, have we found yet if there are any savings in utilities, perhaps supplies that we may not be using because our buildings are closed, and things like that? And is that something that we'll be able to get, or is it just, if you can provide me an update on that, provide us an update on that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. That is not something that we have actually looked at so far. We've been very concentrated on getting our reopening plan together and putting all the plans together, as you've heard, for childcare and food services and instruction and all of those things. So we have not had an opportunity to go back into the budget and look to see where we might have savings. I know that we're working through the closeout of last fiscal year, and I think that will be an important piece to give us some, road signs as to where we might see savings. We will look and see where we found savings in the spring And then we can look in those areas again throughout this year through where we are right now and figure out where we can go to look for savings. But we are looking at everything right now and trying very hard to not reduce, but keep in check all of the expenditures across the board. But as you know, we have some significant needs in order to ensure that all of our students have access, appropriate access to their education.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank you and your team. I know that it's been an unexpected summer. I know how hard your team works, and thank you for all the work that you're doing this summer. There are some other standard operational things that I know you're required to do this summer, and this has been really an enormous amount of work. So thank you and your team, Ms. Peterson, for that. The reason I'm asking is because as Mr. Goldstein and Ms. Van Doren have shared, and I believe Dr. Kennan and all of us, I also have concerns about these costs. And I do think that we need to express to the county what our needs are. And I don't think that I want to go to the county and say I want $12 million based on this table. But what we do know is that we have $3.72 million that would require us to pay our extended day and our food services pay, according to how I understood the PowerPoint, for the first quarter. And these are both generally paid from self-funding programs through payments received from families for extended day care and payments received for our food service, which we did not receive since the school closed. We started the program that is going to expire here at the end of August. The other thing that we know is PPE, and prior to me rolling off of chair, there were discussions in our leadership meetings about the county supporting our PPE needs. And I think that for these two things, they really are extraordinary and not and exceptional circumstances. We would never be in a situation where we would have food services not self-funded, and now we are. And as has been mentioned, we can't afford to lose our staff. So, yes, we have to be very frank and candid. The option is we could do layoffs, but what happens when we're ready to open and we don't have that staff? Also, we've been requested by the state superintendent, I believe, or the Department of Education. I know I saw a memo or something that I was reading that said, please do everything you can to not do layoffs this coming school year. It's not something that I want to do, but I don't think we can for this food service or the extended day, because childcare is a significant issue, not just for our staff, but for our families. And it's going to continue to be as we go through the year, whether we stay in virtual for however long, and when we're able to go into phase into hybrid, and then hopefully and eventually full time. And so, Ms. O'Grady, I would be interested in supporting a letter with requests to the county that they support us, perhaps through the second receipt of care funds, or through their rainy day fund for that $8.9 million approximately. And look at that. I'm willing to use our reserves, but I'm really worried about what is going to continue, and what I know that for at least this quarter, that is something that we can use, even if we use at least the 5.9 for PP something. I mean, these are immediate extraordinary needs. We're not asking them to fund our regular operating services with this broken out request. So I just wanted to put that statement out there that I do think we need to have an official request, and we need to hear officially where they are so that we can try to figure out what our next steps are. We need to have it in writing, because we can't, unfortunately, make such tough decisions based on what we think someone will do or their desire to do something. And these are affecting people's lives in Arlington and in our system. So thank you for the opportunity to go another round. And thank you again, Dr. Duran and Ms. Peterson, for answering all the questions tonight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talento, and it seems as though we'll be discussing that more in new business, so I appreciate that. I'd like to go back now to Ms. Van Doren to see if she has any closing questions.
Okay, so I will say to my colleague, Ms. Talento, that I disagree with her. We need to ask for the total 12.64 million. We have been asked and told repeatedly by the county that we simply need to tell them what we need. I have heard the county manager state that they have $10 million of unused funds from the original CARES Act allotment. We have a rainy day fund that we have not touched. I don't know what defines a rainy day more than a pandemic that has no end in sight. We have a budget that we can't close the gap of using our operating funds because we have programs that are outside and are self-funded. We are in a very difficult situation and we must ask for this money. It is our responsibility to do that. We have employees who will begin working in 20 days who we must assure we are going to pay. These are employees who have to get background checks, who have to be qualified for the jobs. If we lose them, we may not get them back and we may not be able to start up from scratch at the moment when we can begin to open schools, which we all want to do. Meanwhile, we have many, many uses for those employees. A lot of our students, particularly our special needs students, our L students, we cannot aggregate them into classrooms as we had before. We're going to have to dissipate them and they still need one-on-one support in many cases. Many of these employees can help us with that. We can easily reuse them in the same way the county is redeploying, for example, library staff to work in food distribution. We can do those exact same things, but we, like the county, cannot lay people off because we need to hit the ground running. So my motion, which I will bring forward in new business, is for a request to the county, which they asked us for the PPE, which definitely is defined under the CARES Act, that money, and then the money we need to keep our staff on through at least the first quarter, and that amount is 12.64. Conservatively, note that there are many items here that have TBD. We don't even know what the revenue shortfall will be from the state and the county. This is a conservative estimate of what we will need. We cannot go without this money. So I will be bringing this forward, and I will be bringing it forward for the entire amount. So I just wanted to be very clear where I'm going at the end of this meeting.
Thank you, Thank you, Ms. Van Dorn, for giving us a preview of the new business. With that, we'll move to Vice Chair Cannonen, who I see does not have any additional questions at this time, and I appreciate that. And I just wanted to ask Dr. Duran just quickly. We've heard a lot of concern from parents about how we're moving forward in this process, and if you, as parents are hearing this new information, and I think you've gone over this before, but if you could briefly explain how you're continuing this conversation through the task force, who's on the task force, that we have used the survey in the past, and that you have lots of people that you're working with, including our amazing staff, and you're also collaborating and having conversations with superintendents. If you want to just share with folks how we're continuing this process as we move forward, I would appreciate that. And before you do that, I also want to provide my huge thanks to our staff, who I know are working overtime to ensure that when we return to school, our students are being given instruction in a different way than they received it in the spring, that they're continuing to collaborate and have conversations with our parents and members of our community. And I want to thank them for all of that hard work, and also for our teachers, who I know are preparing, at least mentally, to move back into a new type of learning. So, Dr. Duran.
So yes, so we absolutely, first and foremost, I want to echo what you said in terms of our staff who are leading this work, and we have our work groups that are driving a lot of this detail. They're bringing the best thinking, grounded in the data that we're seeing, grounded in the needs that we have. They're driving the bulk of this in terms of our work groups that are set up, and then bringing that thinking to the task force for their feedback. And the task force continues to meet on Mondays with the representative of parents, teachers, staff, students, community members. And then, of course, we are continuing to meet as a Northern Virginia Regional Superintendent Group to understand what we can do to support one another. At this point, as I mentioned earlier, in the entire Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. metro area. We're now pretty much all, with the exception of one school system, which hasn't announced, in this same exact model, at least for the first semester. Some of our colleagues have it for some have for the first semester. We have for the first quarter. So that's the only differentiation. But other than that, we're now uniting in how we can help one another learn best practices. So definitely, we're going to continue that. And also meeting with parent groups. I've met with several parent groups who this week and some next week, just to hear their concerns. Teacher groups, reaching out and meeting with them. And then, of course, as you said earlier, and I said earlier, through the engage process and the emails that are coming in. And I appreciate Dr. Cannon's comments that we addressed a lot of what we were reading in the emails as questions and concerns. And we're trying to do our best on that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran, for the update in this monitoring item. Now, tonight, we have one information item, the adoption of the new school board policy on equity. Dr. Duran, will you introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair Grady. As I mentioned at our last school board meeting, I provided an overview and a history of the amount of work that's gone into the development of this equity policy. So I again want to acknowledge our school board members, our community members, and our staff who've been working on this for quite some time. We're very excited to have gotten it to this point, a step closer to adoption as we're working through the details on that. And I want to thank specifically Mr. Gregory, who's going to be presenting tonight, as he came on board at the beginning of this calendar year, and much of this work had been done. He had taken it from there and has been working to refine it to be able to bring what it is we're bringing tonight, which is an information item on the adoption that we hope will occur at our next meeting on August 20th. And so thank Mr. Gregory, Matt Smith, who's been assisting in our policy, new Chief of Staff Brian Stockton, who recently become involved in this, our previous Chief of Staff Julia Burgos, who put a lot of work into this, so a lot of leadership, but then also community voice has gone into where we are today. And we look forward to some additional feedback that we're going to get from the board tonight as we refine this and from the community. And Mr. Gregory, I will now ask you to give a presentation on the policy that we're really excited to bring this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent, for that welcome. Thank you to the board and the superintendent, as well as Matt Smith, Carolyn Jackson, as well as the equity teams that have the equity policy team that came together in record time to bring this policy before the board for information today. So I appreciate it. Next slide, please. I see myself, but I don't see the presentation.
The slide is there.
Perfect. So again, as the superintendent mentioned, the policy really has been through development for at least 1.5 years, close to 2 years now. And it was started back in late 2018. On about August 2018, the board directed the superintendent at the time to create the equity policy. And APS found that there are 34 other policies relating to equitable practices to support the equity policy, from human relations to J74, which is discipline. At that time, APS also benchmarked the policies against other policies that were created that were national policies. A policy review team was created at that time as well to write the policy in September of 2018. The process of drafting the recommendations and policy took about 3 months with the input of internal offices such as DTL, who assisted with many areas. The plan was reviewed by the board policy subcommittee in December, and the next order of business was a crosswalk between the policy and other APS policies that referenced equity. In February, a draft of the policy went before the board for feedback during a work session. And the school board work session unpacked gender, transgender, and inclusion, and transgender content that was under the non-discrimination policy for staff and students. As the process moved forward in 2019, advisory groups and many advisory groups, as well as all the different stakeholder groups and APS leadership, reviewed the draft policy and was allowed to provide input and feedback. Advisory groups and staff feedback, and that also included internal and external stakeholders. For instance, the county board. As the process moves forward, in May, There was a second review by the board subcommittee before the Department of Teaching and Learning convened with external stakeholders to review feedback. In September, a pretty final working draft was sent to the advisory committee for their feedback, and adoption was paused shortly after, and was paused due to a variety of different factors. For one, I appreciate the board for waiting for my appointment in January for me to be a part of this process. And then shortly after, we also had COVID-19, which also further delayed the adoption of the board policy. So where are we now? So where are we now is that we picked the policy back up, and it was currently picked up in July as the work was resumed. And the Equity Policy Review Team was created at the direction of the board to ensure that stakeholder input had been considered. And that was in July. During July 18th, there was a school board retreat. Upon that retreat, the school board also had some recommendations for the policy, as well as we've received other recommendations from staff, as well as from internals from stakeholders. And here we are today for board information on July 30th. Next slide, please. So the policy has several different components to it. For the first component was around the belief statement. And I will briefly highlight some of the key points within the policy itself. Equity is tied to everything that we do, and we are committed to eliminating inequitable practices and cultivating the unique talents and interests of every student so that success and failure are no longer predictable by student identity, racial, cultural, economic, gender, or any other social factor. Within the policy itself, Arlington Public School acknowledges the historical and current impact of bias, prejudice, and discrimination, and is implementing this equity policy and subsequent implementation procedures to address the impact discrimination has had on staff and students. The board's equity policy has 4 policy standards that I will briefly highlight as its commitment to governance and leadership. 1, policy and procedures development and revision. 2, equitable equity practices. 3, workforce equity practices, as well as operational equity practices. Under the educational equity practice, there are also 6 areas of support to support this provision: resource allocation, curriculum, inclusion, student support, teacher practices, and digital learning equity. Under resources, I want to just briefly highlight is really around the targeted and differentiated investment in teaching and learning experiences. For curriculum, it's about reviewing all materials, making sure they're high quality, inclusive, as well as culturally relevant. The inclusion section also commits not only active listening, but to solicit all voices within the community. All students are welcomed, valued, and shall be included and supported in all schools, classrooms, curricular, and co-curricular activities throughout APS. Our student support area is a section that gives the authority to expand opportunities, increase support for all of our students. And our teacher practices focus on professional development opportunities that will be provided to improve equitable student learning experiences and outcomes, including the curriculum, instructional strategies, and culturally sustaining practices. Next is the digital learning equity. And that provision is today is very relevant, as we want to make sure that we are committed to ensuring that online as well as distant learning is available and accessible to all of our students. The third provision is around workforce equity, and that ensures that students in all ensures equity in all services are provided to employees, including but not limited to recruitment and acquisition of talent, professional development, and our benefits. The next section, number 4, is around operational equity. That includes both facilities and programming, and it commits us to new facilities and programs that contribute to balance and inclusivity. Furthermore, we commit to universal design. Next is around monitoring. That area is specific to the superintendent, as well as the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, to monitor the implementation of the policy through a variety of reports that align to school board goals. Next slide, please. So next steps. The first step in order of business is that the equity policy team soon will review the feedback from today's information section from all stakeholder groups, as well as the feedback that was received from us by the board. One change that will be brought back is to include definitions and the definition of equity as well as inclusivity and inclusion. These changes will be necessary before we adopt the policy next month. The CDIO will also create an equity team this fall to develop implementation procedures, as well as to meet with internal stakeholders to review a draft equity plan to establish the year one work. With anticipation is that in late fall, there will also be an adoption of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan. And our equity teams will prioritize the PIPs with the goal of having some drafts proposed by winter of 2021. So we received a lot of feedback from stakeholders, including the board. And the school board subcommittee and the policy review team will also be involved in the implementation of these procedures and practices. Next slide, please. So this concludes the information presentation for the board and on the draft equity policy. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and also here to support from the historical context will also be Matt Smith, as well as support, and possibly Carolyn Jackson as well. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Gregory, for providing that overview and for some of the additional work that needs to happen between now and the adoption on August 20th. And board members and Chair O'Grady, we're really looking forward to hearing feedback. And again, we're really excited that we're getting closer and closer to this adoption. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran, and thank you, Mr. Gregory. I would like to move now to my colleagues for questions. I'd like to start with Ms. Talento. And Ms. Talento, I would again like to instill the opportunity for you to offer at least 2 questions. And please let me know if you have more so I can determine if we need a second round. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I have questions yet, but I do have some comments on the policy that I want to share. I want to thank our staff and Dr. Duran and Mr. Gregory for bringing this forward. I know that it's something we have put a lot of work in over the years that I've been on the board. With that being said, I do think that the policy still needs work, but I think it's more important to adopt at least a strong framework so that we can start working on PIPs, which really hold the strength and detail of how we're going to implement our equity practices. And I don't think that we can do that without a framework for a policy. So with that, I just want to share with everyone that I will request that we add a line to the end of the policy, that this policy be reviewed annually. And we can also say something effective, it be reviewed annually until all PIPs are developed. But we could also just say it be reviewed annually, and when it's reviewed again, if people do not feel, if the next time the board reviews it, they don't feel that it needs to be reviewed annually, they can delete that line. But I will ask for that to be added, and will bring an amendment forward if it is not between now and the 20th. I also have a concern about the digital learning equity. Policies are really our governance documents, and it's what our families and our staff and our system use to understand what the rules are and the expectations are for how we provide education and the experiences that students should have. And we do not actually provide equitable online learning and distance learning. It's not something we are capable of doing. We cannot guarantee that every student today has access to the internet. We cannot guarantee, or at least I as one board member not aware of, us having all the required softwares that we need to strongly support our English learners or students with disabilities. We are going into virtual learning, understanding that we're doing IEPs. The state is providing us guidance on what IEP times, obligatory times are, and I understand from an email received today from a constituent that that has been reduced, that we're not even able to meet the allotted time, but I believe that is due to waiver. But either way, there's so many challenges with providing distance learning in an equitable manner, and we just have to acknowledge that. And so I can't adopt this policy without a word change there, so I'll be recommending that we say APS will strive to ensure that digital learning, including online learning and distance learning, is equitable for all students. And digital learning platforms and practices will be constantly reviewed for equitable accessibility, and we will work to constantly improve those mechanisms or something to that effect. If we were to adopt it this way, I think that a parent could sue us and say, you do not provide equitable learning, online learning for all students. And, I don't know if we could defend that. And this is just from what I know today. And so I am worried about that until the internet, it becomes a public utility and everyone has access to it. I just don't know how we can say that. I'm also worried about under teacher practices, there is a word that we use in the second sentence on page 2 of the policy. We say teachers use the most effective resources in classroom practices, including but not limited to instructional, disciplinary, communications, etc. I'm concerned about the word disciplinary. In the current work that we do today, we know that discipline practices have disparities in them. We actually have a policy on discipline, and it actually is a policy that's written from a enforcement perspective and a punitive perspective. I am concerned about that. I know that it has come up in the past. I think when we were working on the SRO MOU to update that, I believe we talked about making sure that we updated that and really worked on what the tone of that could look like. And that's when we started looking at the handbook and stuff. I'm concerned about the word disciplinary in there because I'm not sure what we're referring to. Are we referring to behavior management, behavior management with restorative practices? I'm not sure what that word means. And when I read it, I immediately associated it with disciplinary practices that tend to be punitive. Now, that might be my personal bias with the word, that when I see that word in education, that's how I interpret it. So I need clarity on that. And maybe there's a better word that we can use if we are referring to disciplinary practices that are based on our disciplinary policy, which I'm not a fan of. That was, I think, last revised in 2016. So anyway, those are the things that stand out. I do have other, and then there's one more thing that I did want to share. Under the facilities and program planning, we talk about principles of universal design, and I really think we need to make those initial caps. I know that seems like a small detail, but the challenge is if you're not versed or understand the special education world and students with disabilities, you may not recognize that principles of universal design is not a high-level philosophy, but it's actually a very specific set of standards. And I mean, I'm not as well versed in it as I should be, but a specific set of standards and expectations on how you would design a building that goes, from what I understand, beyond the ADA expectations to make sure that our buildings are accessible by everyone and anyone, regardless of their disability. And it is something that we have worked on, including for people who are new to the equity world, who may not understand the students with disabilities world. I think that we should make that initial caps, because when it's initial caps, people say, well, what is that? That's the name of something. And with that, I will end with, on that note, I will end with the fact that I appreciate the board collaboration on strengthening our inclusion language. I'm really grateful for that. I thought that we did a good job in really noting the work that we've undertaken on our inclusion goal over the last few years. So thank you, Ms. O'Grady. Those are my comments. I don't think I have any questions unless Mr. Gregory, you can, or Dr. Don, you guys can help me understand how we're looking at using the word disciplinary in teacher practices.
Sure. So I would like to actually call on Carolyn Jackson, who's with us, who was there in terms of the start of the equity policy dating back to 2018.
Ms. Jackson, you may be on mute.
Hello, good evening. I'm sorry, I was distracted for a second. My son walked in. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Do you want me to repeat that, Erin? Or Mr.
Yes,
Gregory?
would you like to repeat the question, Ms. Talento?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Jackson, for joining us today. It's great to see you. I know we don't get to see many of you in person these days. As we're looking through the equity policy on page 2 under teacher practices, we have a line in there that says teachers use the most effective resources in classroom practices, including but not limited to instructional, disciplinary, communications, etc. Resources and practices promote student success. And I have concerns about the word disciplinary because the way I am interpreting that word, it's related to disciplinary practices, which we know we have disparities in. And when we look at our discipline policy, it's really not a how do we support and grow our students policy. It's more of a punitive and an enforcement policy. So if you could provide some clarity on that, and I was suggesting maybe we use another word depending on what we mean by it. I may be misinterpreting it.
No, sure. I would love to provide clarity and good evening. First of all, when we started this process, it was almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And at that time, we were trying to align the wording to what was already in our policies. Okay. And so as we move forward in more alignment with the VDOE, I think it is more appropriate to use perhaps behavior expectations, because that is the journey that we've been on with our discipline committee, working with Cynthia Johnson and Jeanette Allen in formulating that document, but it hasn't been released yet because it's still in development and also soliciting staff feedback. And so I do agree, but right now the current wording in our APS policies refers to discipline. So that would be a very progressive and needed change throughout that entire document.
So if we changed it to behavior expectations, that would align with what the intent was of the origination of that wording? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's also more culturally responsible.
Yes, I agree.
And responsive.
Yep,
because with professional learning for our staff, that will be included with those behavior expectations in that guideline, in that handbook. It does also take into account the social emotional learning of students. It takes into account students with disability and what their cognitive abilities are, and understanding what are appropriate behaviors for learning, but not looking at it in a deficit model.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Jackson. I appreciate that, and that really helped me as I work with my colleagues on providing some changes that I would like to see before August. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Ms. Talento, for your feedback too on all the additional areas, and we'll make sure that we address those, and we look forward to hearing from the rest of your colleagues on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair O'Grady.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talento. Ms. Van Dorn, do you have any questions or comments? And do you anticipate needing a second round? Thank you.
Well, you tell me if I need a second round. I don't really have any questions. I feel like I've lived this very closely for the past 2 years. And I really, so I don't know if I'm going to need a second round because I'm going to have comments like Ms. Talento. First, I want to acknowledge the work this sat sort of not on the shelf, but in abeyance for a period of time, Mr. Gregory, until you came, as you acknowledged. And I appreciate that you came in the middle of all this, and there were a lot of commitments and a lot of work that had been done that you inherited, some of which you knew about and some of which you didn't. And we had to go through a bit of a memory process to pull it all together. And I really appreciate that you ran and got up to speed on all that and brought this forward. So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for the structure of the document. It makes a lot of sense to me. You know, many of our policies are kind of like the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. The parents know them by heart, and they bring the words back to us like they do with the strategic plan. This is going to be one of those documents that our community brings to us constantly because they are thirsty, they are hungry for this equity, and they want it to happen, and they want our words to really matter. So when you hear the board members being particular about words, we want to mean it when we say it, and we want you to run with this and do all the work I know you already have laid out for all the PIP development and the equity group at the school level. So we're all very excited about it, but we all want to make really, really sure the words are exactly that we say exactly what we mean to provide you with all the support you need. So thank you for all that. And I want to mention to everybody at the end of the policy, there are up to, I think, 50 policies, APS policies that this touches on. So that means this is embedded in our practices across the system. That's how many policies this touches, and it probably touches all of them. So I just really want to thank you for that and noting all of those policies. I have some editorial comments that I'll bring, but I've submitted those and I'll pursue those. I want to comment that procedure-wise, the staff has brought this to us. This is now with the board. So the board has to finalize these edits in collaboration with the staff. But that's where we are now. This is the board's work at this point. And I want the community to know that in fulfilling our commitment to inclusion, particularly in the definition that relates to inclusion for students with disabilities, rather than creating a separate inclusion policy, we all agreed to include those concepts regarding inclusion, fully including students with disabilities in our schools and in all classrooms and all areas. That is embedded in the inclusion section of this policy. And that is a commitment that evolved over the course of 2 years, and that agreement to not have a separate policy, but have it included in this policy. And that is strongly stated in this policy. And the community probably doesn't realize this, but board members don't have conversations outside of one-offs with each other because we're not allowed to for FOIA reasons. So we had a lot of one-by-one conversations over the past 10 days to make sure that we fulfilled our commitment in that area on inclusion. And I think it's a very strong section. So I wanted to thank everybody, Mr. Gregory, for bringing it to this point. I'm not going to go through my wordsmithing word by word, but I really will be pursuing that with my colleagues, because I think we need to make sure we mean every single word we have here so that everybody can hang on this and come together and work together on equity. And I know you're probably going to hear from one of my colleagues about a definition of equity, which I do support adding to this, because I think one of the challenges we're going to have over the next year is getting everybody on the same page. And I also think in a year, as Ms. Talento has suggested, we are probably going to want to tweak this, because while we may start out with a definition and we may want to tweak it, but I think we're all going to have to process this, take it on board, have it mean, and all of us collectively know what we're saying and know what it means to be pursuing true equity in our school system. So I'm going to leave it really at that with the big thank you. And I have wordsmithing, but I'm not going to do that in a board meeting. And I look forward to doing that with my colleagues so we can bring it forward as a document to approve and let you get off the ground and running. And I want to thank you. And I know that Carolyn Jackson was intimately involved with this at the beginning. And Matt Smith has now taken on board the job of driving our policies through. I'm just also amazed at how many new people we have and that we're kind of seamlessly moving this work forward. So thank you. That's it. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. I'd like to go to Mr. Goldstein now. Mr. Goldstein, it's your opportunity, and if you think you need additional time, please let me know.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I really only have one point here. Erin, did I hear you say that we will be seeing a definition of equity in this policy before action on August 20th?
Yes, there were, a lot of feedback that came back in regards to the policy and having a definition within the policy. As you know, there is a definition of equity as well as inclusion that's in the strategic plan. And we want to make sure that we honor our strategic plan. And we also want to make sure that everyone is aware of what the definition of equity and inclusion is.
Okay, good, because as you know, we've had this conversation, and I want to honor the long history, as Carolyn said, almost 2 years, that this has been worked on by staff in the community. And we have, tweaked it and wordsmithed it and could continue to do that really for a long time. But I believe that what we really need to do is move it into operation with the understanding that we come back to it after, I don't know, sometime certain, a year, whatever, and see how it's going and continue to tweak it, because that's really what happens with the development of all good policy. But before we do that, I think we need to have a definition in there, because this policy says that we're going to embed and review and support and commit and assess and resource equity, but we never say what it is. So that's my one point here, that we need a definition. I understand that the definition that we have in the strategic plan is, that definition's 2 years old. That's not in line with our current thinking on equity, but we need to start somewhere, even if our first order of business with that policy or with the PIP that attends it is to change the definition, to sharpen it to something that's more current and more workable. So that's those are my comments. Thank you. I do not need, Monique, I don't need you don't need to come back to me.
Thank you very much for that information, Mr. Goldstein, and for your comments. I appreciate that. Dr. Cannon?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Grady. A lot of good comments have already been made, and many thanks have been made. So in the interest of time, I won't try to repeat all the names of people who've been involved. It has been a lot of work, as my colleagues have already shared. Do want to thank you, though, Mr. Grady. You've been a champion of this idea of having an APS equity policy for, I think you were kind of the originator of this work in terms of promoting this idea when you came back from the Masson conference. And so congratulations and thank you very much. And of course, Dr. Duran for also helping us shepherd and get to this point. So again, I won't try to elaborate on the thank yous. I agree. I look forward to working on the definition and seeing how that plays out. Just want to mention, Ms. Van Doren was talking about the inclusion section. One of the, we've looked at a number of equity policies over time. We've looked at them at conferences. We've studied them ourselves at our own work sessions. And I do want to mention that one of the things that is unique, I believe, about our equity policy or our proposed equity policy is that it does have the concept of inclusion in the equity policy. A lot of school systems are talking about inclusion, but they've treated those the two ideas separately, and we've brought it into our equity policy. I think it's a nice fit. And then I just want to share that as we go into the fall and we talk about our school board's work and action plan, we might want to consider mentioning the development of the PIPs that, that is staff work, just overseeing and supporting that work to develop the PIPs that will go along with this equity policy. I also just want to weigh in on the idea of revisiting this policy. I think we will want to do that, as has already been mentioned. I do not, however, think that revisiting it a year later is enough time, especially just given our bandwidth and our workload. So I think the 3-year time horizon is a good one to consider, and I know we'll be talking about that going forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Cannon, and I appreciate that, and thank you for those kind words. I just want to say that this is a very important moment for our community to be able to look at an equity policy. As Dr. Cannon was kind enough to mention, This was a concern of mine when I came back from the Minority Student Achievement Network when I was one of the first things I did when I was elected, and it was shared that it's very important if you're going to hire a Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer to ensure that that person has an equity policy so the community knows where we're going and the direction that that person would take us in. And so, as was mentioned earlier, it was important for us to have the opportunity, we felt, as we continued to work on this policy, to ensure that Mr. Gregory had the opportunity to add his thoughts on this. And we come forward with, I think, a good policy. As my colleagues have mentioned, there are some items here that can be tweaked, that need to be tweaked, especially since it was first developed. And so I look forward to doing that. I do think a definition is important, and that was something that was important when we looked at the strategic plan. Today, that definition may need additional tweaking, and we need to look at that. And I believe our community is ready to look at us moving forward in equity. We hear it from our community, and I think that that's very heartening, especially in these times, that equity is very important. So this is good work. We have more work to do. We welcome community input as we move forward and approach of adopting this later in August. So I do also appreciate the opportunity for us to be able to revisit this policy, and I think having a check-in and trying to figure out whether or not things are working a year from now may be valuable to us. I do not have any questions regarding this, but I also do want to say how important I know this is to several members of our community, to our communities of color, to our communities who have English as a second language, to our communities, our special ed community, and also our LGBTQ community. We are one community, and we want to make sure at APS, in my opinion, that we are working to support everyone. The valuable, wonderful instruction that we offer should be something that everyone feels that they can embrace and enjoy and experience 100%. And so this policy helps us move in that direction. I believe we have excellent people to help us make this policy a reality, and I look forward to the continued work on it and thank my colleagues for their comments regarding this policy and look forward to our eventual adoption of it. Thank you very much. That's all I have on that topic, and I want to thank Mr. Gregory and all the other people who have worked on it for bringing this to us. And this item will come back for action at our next meeting on August the 20th. We are now at new business. Board members, is there any new business?
I have a item of new business, Chair O'Grady.
Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. Will you please bring your new business forward? And if you have a motion, will you please offer it?
I do. Thank you very much. I do want to make a motion related to our deficit, operational deficit during this time of the pandemic. I move that the chair of the school board, together with the superintendent, send a letter to the county board chair, and county board, and the county manager, requesting funds, one-time funds, to fill a $12.64 million gap that we currently have as related to projected needs due to the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you very much for that motion, Ms. Van Dorn. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Talento, for that second. Ms. Van Dorn, would you like to speak to your motion?
I would like to do this formally because I do believe that the county has funds that we can access, and I think that we need to formally make this request, and I would hope that in the letter you all can explain the critical need for these funds. Some are easily understandable, like the PPE and the other safety issues, the devices. There's just a lot of nuts and bolts things that clearly are one time, but my biggest urgent need is to close our gap for our salaries of our employees who we know we need to keep on board and who we cannot use our operating funds to support, and who in 20 days we may have to lay off if we don't get this funding. So that is why I've brought this tonight, particularly after hearing that in the leadership meeting yesterday, the leadership of the county board said that they would get back to us sometime in October. And that just simply is too late. We need this answer before August 19th. And we do not have another board meeting until after that point. So that's why I'm bringing that tonight. Thank you.
I know we.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Ms. Van Dorn. I'd like to go ahead and give my colleagues an opportunity to speak to the motion, and I will now go to Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein, do you have any comments regarding this motion?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So my understanding is there was a joint leadership meeting yesterday, and this came up, and the request came up. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the response was that the county board would have a better, or the county government would have a better understanding of whether they could accede to this request in October when their tax revenue, the date at which their property tax payments were going to come rolling in as revenue. Is that right?
Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Duran for that.
So yes, in our joint county meeting yesterday, we presented them with the chart that you saw on the cost in my monitoring report. The discussion there was, we had a lot of discussion on what those needs were and why. The county manager and the county leadership on the board was very supportive of saying that they were here to help us, particularly around the health and safety needs. What did we need? They were appreciative of us letting us know at this time what our needs were, to please keep bringing this back, keep them updated on what our needs were as we move forward fiscally. And then at the end of the conversation was stated that they're very supportive of supporting us in order to make a final decision on, they wanted to make sure that we brought our full best thinking, and because as I said on the presentation, this was a lot of TBDs on there, and we're still wanting to see how much of the $3 million actually would be needed, because some would be potentially for doing childcare, or some would be potentially for food service, and that would reduce that. So they asked, can you please bring that back, when you have more detail? And then in October is when they would have a better sense of their revenue, and they could make a decision on the actual commitment they could provide.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so what I don't understand is if this letter that's part of Nancy's motion were written, now, how is that going to change the county's response? Which my understanding is that they really don't know the answer until October.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. Do you need, is there an expected answer, or is that a rhetorical question?
No, I'm looking for an answer. I'm trying to find out why taking this action now, as Nancy's put forward this motion, is going to be any different from what happened yesterday and the answer that we got yesterday.
Well, I can't speak to how the county will respond to it. I think what I heard Ms. Van Doren's motion was asking for one-time funds now, commitment to the exact dollar amount now. That I think was and I don't want to speak for Ms. Van Doren either, but I think that's what I heard in the motion. And so what was different about that than yesterday was, here are our needs that we know of right now. Here's what we know our current amount that we will be needing support. We also don't know, it's not full and complete. So we were not asking yesterday, give us this 12.64 now, because we had the conversation about this could go up, it could go down, and the 3 million for the employees part, but other parts of the instructional piece, as you saw, were TBD. The state we spoke to the fact that the state revenue, we won't know till August, so that's an unknown. So we did not specifically ask, we need 12.64 or 46, whatever it is, right now. That, I think, is the difference, Mr. Goldstein. And again, I can't speak to how they'll respond. Getting a letter stating that versus what we were sharing with them was our needs, and really trying to open up the dialogue to make sure that they were clear all the way through what our needs were. And they committed and said, please bring back what those are and keep these regularly updated.
Okay, thank you. I feel torn here in that I'm definitely in favor of being definite and clear in terms of what our needs are and what we would like. However, the TBDs are giving me pause because, if we ask for, this today and we find out there's really a different amount tomorrow, a higher amount tomorrow, what's the plan after that? What's the strategy? Just keep writing letters to the county board that says, and now we need some more. So it's giving me heartburn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein, for your comments. I'd like to now turn to Ms. Talento.
Thank you, Ms. O'Grady. I think, as I shared earlier, I am worried about this. Ms. Van Doren, would you mind reading the motion again? I did want to ask that so I understood exactly what it said.
Ms. Van Doren, I believe you might be on mute, and I am working on getting a copy of your motion up visually
I'm
as well.
sorry, I just typed a motion up, and I'm sorry, it's going to be worded a little bit different because I just wrote it out. Here is the motion I wrote and just sent to Ms. Elliott and Ms. O'Grady. I move that the school board chair and superintendent send a letter to the county board to request $12.64 million to fund Arlington Public Schools deficit needs for the first quarter of the 2020-2021 school year to fund critical costs related to the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you. The reason I ask, and I think I feel similar to where Mr. Goldstein is, in my experience while I was chair and vice chair in working with the county board, I was always grateful for their intent and their collaboration and their support for schools. But every time that we've had to discuss finances, it has been very difficult from where I was sitting, and perhaps it was my communication style when I became chair. It's very possible that I was not clear in what I felt the concerns I had were regarding finances and so forth. And where I believed there was intent to support financially when we asked, there was not ability to do so. And so I don't want to, I'm considering supporting this motion just for the simple fact of just making a formal request. I don't think that the tone has to be aggressive. It can just be very basic, just because, I've heard in the past that they don't know what we need if we don't ask. And asking in conversation is, especially when you have 2 out of 5 respective board members, while you would think that in those leadership meetings, there would be a lot of strength in those conversations, at the end of the day, it's a full board alongside their manager and a full board alongside their superintendent who makes decisions, budgetary decisions. So this is where I'm torn, because I really want to give, I don't want the county to feel as though we are demanding or that we are not being thoughtful of their response. But I think that they need to maybe see it formally requested so that the next time there's a joint leadership meeting, it's not a discussion of, well, we'll let you know, or I just think clarity is really important in the time frame that we're under. Not knowing whether we can fund the extended day workers. I don't know if that was emphasized enough in our discussion, but from what I took away from what Ms. Peterson stated is that we are looking at our reserves funds to determine if there's enough money based on prior years surpluses of extended day funds, which is a self-funding operation, to see if there's enough to pay for the wages in the first quarter. And if there isn't, we don't really know where we can use that money. And so then do we wait till that point to ask? And what does that look like? And where are the situations then? And so I'm processing this. It may be difficult. I'm processing this, but that's where I am right now. I'm interested in hearing where my other colleagues are. And again, as I said earlier, I felt confident saying the extended day, the PPE, and the food services because I felt like those were strong arguments. And that is an $8.972 million request. But that's not the motion put forward, and I just don't have enough information to know where everyone else is or how everyone is thinking. So I'm still processing, and I don't know how I will vote on this motion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talento. I do, there were a few questions that were put forth that maybe it would be appropriate to have Ms. Van Dorn answer as the owner of the motion. Ms. Van Dorn, I will recognize you to answer some of those questions before going to Dr. Kannanen.
I have a basic philosophy that you can't get what you don't ask for. And my experience over 6 years on the school board is that if we don't make formal requests to the county board, it's only conversation. We have to make a formal request. We are up against what I consider an emergency deadline of August 19th, in which we will employ staff who we do not have funds to underwrite. And I'm not sure that that point is very clear to the county board. They don't have the same kind of funding situation that we have. This is where we are. I think that letter should say, this is how much we made, how much we need. They invited the request for things like the PPE and cleaning supply. I've heard that stated publicly by the board. I've heard it stated that they have CARES Act funding that is surplus. So they do have the funds. The question is, are they going to choose to use that money in that way, or do they rightfully have another purpose for that? And I don't have the answer to that question, but I do have an obligation on behalf of this school system to formally inform the people who are the recipients of the taxpayers' dollars to ask them for these funds. They may not be able to fund it. They may only be able to fund part of it, but this has been presented to them. It has been presented to us. It is a very conservative estimate, and we may very well be back at them to answer Mr. Goldstein's question. We may be back to ask more money. We are in a pandemic. Our staff is so beautifully, calmly, methodically handling these things, but we are in a crisis situation, and that does require funding. So simply writing a formal request, asking for the money that we know we need, and formally asking for that when they have a pot of money, at least one. They also have the rainy day fund to which we contribute. I don't know when there's another rainy day. If we get through this, this is simply a request. They respond. I can't speak for them, but I can say that on behalf of the school system, I have a number, I have an estimate. It is a conservative estimate. I need to present this to them formally and ask them for help so we can employ our great staff and keep them on board until we can get back to school. I think that is our obligation to do that. And I don't have to answer the question for the county. It's a request to them, and we can say it as nicely as we want, as factually as we want, but we should transmit that information formally to them and also allow the community to say, we support that request.
Thank you.
I just wanted to answer that.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. Now I'd like to go to our Vice Chair, Dr. Cannon, and Dr. Kannanen.
All right, thank you. And I have a number of questions and concerns, and I'll see if I can condense them down. I mean, let me start by saying it's very, very rare that we get a last-minute motion without any warning. And I think, as I often say, there are times when we operate at our worst, and this is an example of that. Generally, when we know a motion is coming, we can, for example, ask the superintendent for his recommendation, and he can get it, provide recommendation himself or provide it from his staff. If we're going to vote on this motion tonight, we have no real opportunity for contemplation. And getting more information and getting a thoughtful response from the superintendent. I'm sure he has a response, but he won't have a chance himself to talk to his staff. There are a lot of questions that I would like to hear from Ms. Peterson on, as well as Dr. Duran. And, at the end of the day, while this is not going to be I'm not going to ask this yet, one of my questions would simply be, why vote tonight? Why not vote at our next meeting? Generally, even under new business, when board members have had new business, they have mentioned it at one meeting, and then we voted at the following meeting. So I'm not a fan of asking for this vote this evening. I want to make that very clear. One of the many things that we don't know, we're talking about what the county board heard us say. The county board and the county manager are not in this room and not part of this conversation. So, we can ask Dr. Duran what he said. We can ask myself and Ms. O'Grady what we all remember we said at that meeting. The fact is, we don't know what the county manager and the county board heard. I believe that they heard a request. So in that sense, maybe I disagree with Dr. Duran a little bit. He emailed that very spreadsheet that we saw in that PowerPoint. He emailed it to all of them. They have it. They know that we have a deficit. They know we made, I think, very clear that we don't have any other way of getting money. I think they know that. So I strongly feel that they do understand that we were making an initial request, and I think they gave us the answer that they have at the time. I would be surprised if that answer changes based on anything we do next. Their answer is simply that they are still gathering their numbers and information and will not know those numbers. The big thing that happens in October is that real estate payments, and they simply won't have, their full picture. So having said all that, let me just ask a couple of questions, and I hope Ms. Peterson is going to be ready as well. Let me ask the first one. If we write a letter saying our first quarter deficit is $12.64 million, is Ms. Peterson comfortable? Dr. Duran, I'll ask you, would you and Ms. Peterson be comfortable telling the county board that what we need for the first quarter is $12.64 million?
Well, again, and I'll have Ms. Peterson join in, what we said, these are our estimated costs at this time, and so that is not, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that is our deficit. I'm using literally your words, okay? Mm-hmm. When we say that is our deficit, I don't think that would be comfortable saying that. Saying at this time here, which we did yesterday, which, as you said, I did email them, saying this is what we know right now as going to be our needs. And if you recall, Dr. Cannon also said we're going to probably need much more, and our deficit is going to be more than this. So yes. That's why I would not feel comfortable saying what you just said.
So are you certain that we would not have a follow-up letter with a different number within a month?
Absolutely certain we would have a different number
we
later.
Would follow up, we would send another letter to the county board with a different number, perhaps within the month.
That is, yes, this number is not definite. It's missing too much in terms of TBD. And again, we put the high-end costs for the staffing categories and not knowing the additional state revenue loss that's coming.
Right, and yes, as was clarified earlier, the likelihood is that we will find out, for example, that our state revenues are lower. They are going into session on October 18th. We hope they will finalize a budget, but that would probably be, 2 weeks later, September?
Likely beginning of September.
We don't know. Can I ask Ms., was that 2 questions?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Ms. Peterson.
Can I ask Ms. Peterson, how, and I know, Ms. Peterson, you also said that, you referred to closeout funds, that you're going to learn something. We do closeout, I think, in December, right? So how are you seeing this timeline? You have several uncertainties that you are going to learn more about in September, November, December. How does this timeline play out? And how do you kind of think about that first quarter deficit and when, why, and how we kind of need to patch that up? How do we think about this year's budget, given that we're headed in with a deficit?
That's a really great question. Having never done a budget in a pandemic before, I'm still trying to figure it out as we go along. As I said, we'll find out something from the state in August, September. That might be one of the first times that we sit down and try to put all of the numbers together with the understanding that we would not have all of the information until October with the county's information at that point. So I think it's going to be one of those times when we're continually looking at the situation and keeping you informed as we go along. And then I guess at some point we will need to figure out what we are actually doing about the deficit, but I'm honestly unsure about exactly what point that would be. I think probably after we find out the state revenue is a good milestone to check in to see where we are on the first quarter expenditures and the state revenue, and start to put a plan together for how to do this.
And Ms. Peterson, also, the additional thing we've talked about is once we know a better plan for how we will be using the extended day and the food service staff, that would also give you a better sense of what that 3 million would look like.
Absolutely.
Which could potentially come down.
It's gonna be a continual information gathering process as we work through all of this. This is so new to everyone, and honestly, we're just trying the best we can to keep up with everything that's happening.
Can I ask one more question and then my comment and then I'm done, or do you want, I can also come around a second time?
Yeah, if I could come back to you a second time. I do see also that Mr. Goldstein has his hand up, so it looks like we will need to come around for a second time. So I'd like to recognize myself. And I just would like to clarify that in our meeting with the chair and the vice chair and the manager, this was the first time that we were able to put any numbers around what our needs were. And I believe it was made very clear that we are still looking at trying to pin down exactly what those needs are. But this was a touch point as opposed to a request, because we are still trying to figure out what those actual needs are. And I think that it was received in that way. And I think that may be where we are, trying to figure out exactly what our needs are. And I do want to honor the way that, and want to be able to acknowledge and share the way that the information was presented. It was presented as, this is where we are, this is what we think we need. And that is exactly, I think, how it's being presented tonight as well. And so I am not sure whether or not we have enough clarity at this moment to move forward, though I do also appreciate the urgency for which Ms. Van Dorn is making this motion. I do understand the urgency and why we need to look at it in this way. And I think it would be helpful for me to have more information as to whether or not we are in a situation where we cannot cover our costs in another 20 days if we do not have this additional funding, because I think that is an important aspect, and that is not the impression that I got when from the presentation today. So that is the question that I have, Dr. Duran.
Ms. Peterson, can you help provide some of your best thinking? I know we've been really working through this with that specific question that Ms. O'Grady just asked in terms of between now and the 19th. And I don't know that all of those employees that are on that 3 million are coming back on the 19th. That Ms. Peterson, I think some are the 24th too. But I mean, that's just a few days difference, but just for clarity's sake, and your thoughts on and your feedback on that. I know you and I have been really working through this.
Yes, we have. And we do have our extended day supervisors who would be coming back on the 19th, not all of our extended day staff. They would not come back until closer to the actual start of school. So we do have a little bit more time there. This is lots of discussions have occurred already around this issue, and we are as flummoxed as everyone else as to what the best course of action is on this. But we can try to put together some more numbers and figures and see if we can figure out possibly how much the child care piece might offset the total cost and bring that back to you. But that will be something that might not be available until a little bit later.
So to follow up on that question, Ms. Peterson, if this was something that the board wanted to provide more detail in a formal request, and we did that at the next meeting on August 20th, between now and August 20th, are we going to be in a financial situation, I think Mr. Grady's question is, that would require us to do it now versus if we were to send it then, given the employee groups that are impacted by potentially needing different funding from our operating dollars?
Understood. I actually don't know when exactly every single employee that we're talking about is scheduled to report to work. So that would be good information to have and then determine what the answer is here. I just don't know exactly when all of the other staff is scheduled to report.
Well, I think the two categories would be the extended day and the food service, correct? That's all that's in that $3 million, which is not $3 million, that's the whole, for the whole quarter. If we're really looking at just the pay period, it's, what is it, 700 and, I go back to it.
Right, it's $768,000 per pay period and $3.072 million for the quarter.
And within that
again, I you know, the first paycheck is not until September the 15th for anybody starting in August. They don't get paid until September the 15th. They do report to work, so that is something that we need to focus on. And as I said, the extended day supervisors report to work on August the 19th. When the rest of the extended day staff, which is the bulk of the cost associated with extended day, reports to work, I don't know at this point. I don't know when all of our food service workers are scheduled to report to work either. So I would need to find out what that is, unless Mr. Redding, if he's still here, has that information at hand. And that would be very helpful to know, because then I would know if we bring all the supervisors back on August the 19th, how much they cost versus not bringing any of the other staff back until we use them to provide childcare. That's the kind of information that would be helpful to me to be able to answer your question.
Mr. Redding?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that data that I can provide right now, but we can collaborate and get that data together.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Grady, I guess our answer is we need a little bit more time to understand that, and given that employees do not report to the end of August for the majority, but there's some that might be around the 19th. There are some on the 19th, some are closer to school. We would need a little bit more time for that to answer that question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran. And Dr. Duran, I just wanted to additionally ask you if about your communications with the county manager. Do you speak with the county manager often? And is this, and when you do, is this a topic of discussion? Thank you.
Yes, we speak weekly, at least once, if not more, sometimes mostly much more. And yes, this has been a topic of a conversation. And then, as you noted, yesterday was the first day we actually brought dollar amounts and specifics. But all the way through, as we've been speaking since I started here, he has said over and over again, we want to be here to support you with these additional expenditures that are going to be specific to one-time costs on health and safety, what is going to be needed for reopening of schools. Please bring us those specifics so that I can have that, so that when we make our decisions that we want to make, and if you recall yesterday, you know, that he said, quote unquote, that you're going to be a priority, the schools. He used that word a couple of times, if you recall, in our meeting, and that is what he said all this time. But up until yesterday in our conversations, because working with Ms. Peterson, we just recently were able to put all of these numbers onto one document, and I thank her for doing that. It was difficult to get all this from different places, and that was the first time to show the specifics. But yes, we do talk about it all the time.
Thank you very much. With that, I want to go back around to do another round. And Ms. Van Dorn, I want to give you the opportunity to ask a question or make a comment before we go back to the other board members.
Thank you. I want to remind everybody this is just a letter, and it can be termed in any way you want. You can soften the language. I'm making a motion to write a letter. I'm not writing the letter. So it can be stated in any way. Preliminary costs of, a request for, whatever you want to say it. But we know that it is going to be a minimum of this amount of money. And I want to tell you why I want to do this tonight and I don't want to wait. We have contracts and we are obligated to bring the extended day staff and the food service staff back in. When they begin to work, we are obligated to pay them. And both of those funds of money are money that are supposed to be offset with revenue. And we do not know if we are allowed to use our reserves to fund that. Our schools are already operating at a deficit right now. We know that. We closed a $40 million gap by the end of last year. We're already going to be operating at a deficit. It is against the Virginia code for this school board to operate at a deficit. We are going to have to close this gap. There is this particular area of extended day and food service that I do not believe that we are going to be allowed to use our operating funds or our reserves to close. To me, this is an exigent situation that we have to address. And we have been told repeatedly by the county to make a request to them related to the pandemic. And I'm simply asking us to do that. We can do this every month as far as I'm concerned. It's a pandemic. We need to ask them for what we want and we need to put it in writing and not wait. I think we have to abide by the law, which means balance our budget. We need to make sure not to use funds, our operating educational funds, for self-funded projects. And those are situations that I think they need to understand and somehow help us with this. So I'm putting the whole amount down because I've been given the whole amount. They may not give us all that. There can be a conversation between the superintendent, Ms. O'Grady, and the leadership of the, and Dr. Cannon with the leadership of the county. That's fine with me. I want to put a marker down and say, this is where we are, explain the difficulty that we're in, and ask them for funding, because as of August 19th, we are going to be committing ourselves to money that I don't know we have in hand in any way to fund. And I think this is an exigent situation. And I agree with Dr. Cannon, and it's not always a good idea to do this, but I'm talking about a letter asking for something. I'm not asking for anything else but that a letter go specifically transmitting this to the county board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Van Dorn. Mr. Goldstein.
Yeah, thank you. So let me pull that thread a little bit. Nancy said that she thought we can't, according to state law, we can't operate at a deficit. And maybe Leslie, you can chime in here. And on what time frame is that? Is that at all the first penny, daily, quarterly, annually? I mean, what time frame does that imply?
We can't end the year in the deficit.
Okay. Thank you. So, and also, while we're on this financial question, what happens if we do not have an answer from the county board or a commitment of funds or something by the time that the employee groups in question start to return to work? So I guess August 19th.
I'm sorry, was that for me?
No, I guess it's really for the superintendent.
Yes, Ms. Peterson, please.
Or both of you.
So what happens if we don't have an answer from the county by the time some of these staff start to report to work? Is that the question?
Well, what happens if we don't have a commitment of funds by the time folks in this employee category return to work?
I believe, Dr. Duran, you can help me with this. I believe we'll have to make a decision about whether or not we bring those employees back at that time.
Is it possible we do bring the employees back?
It is possible. We'd have to look yes, it is possible.
Okay. I guess with the idea, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that because there could be an idea that funding coming later could make up for or reimburse whatever deficit we face on August 19th?
I think it's more of an operational, we're looking at it more from the operational perspective, that yes, we are hoping that the county will come through with funding that will help us to provide for these employees. But the other half of that is we have over 450 extended day employees. If we say to them, we are not going to be employing you because we don't have the money for you, then they are no longer employed, which is something that we can do. But then when we make the decision that we want to go back in person, and if we are going to have extended day, then we have to go through the process of rehiring over 450 employees for our extended day program. Which
will take months.
Yes, it will take months. It's difficult under the best circumstances to keep all of the positions filled, to have to try to fill all 400 and some odd, close to 500 positions. And the same goes for our food services employees as well, especially if we're starting with a smaller number of sites than all of our schools. And we want to try to keep expanding those sites for students.
And in addition, our thinking is, again, as I was talking about repurposing these employees, that for those employees that would be repurposed, they're going to be doing other operational functions to help us with reopening schools. So if operating dollars are going to pay them for that, it is different because they're not being paid to do childcare through operating dollars. They're not being paid through operating dollars to do food service. That would be separated out because when they're doing the childcare, that would be the fees that would be paying them, and that's when we would only have enough of them for that. Any additional, we would repurpose them, and then we would have to use our operating dollars for that. Now, having the operating, so that's the legality question that Ms. Van Dorn was asking earlier about, can we pay folks to do childcare with operating funds? No, but we're not going to be paying them to do childcare if they're repurposed. But then the bigger issue is having the funds available, and that was what your questioning was about earlier. So I just wanted to clarify those 2 points in terms of what our thinking is at this time.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. So I just want to say a couple of things here. So I'd like to take some more time to discuss this with you and with my colleagues before we arrive at a course of action. I do want to reiterate, I am a fan of being clear and definite, and we need to do that. I'm just not 100% sure at this point what it is that I want to say clearly. If our virtual situation continues, we're going to have this problem again. We're going to have it every quarter. If the 12.6 million is a quarterly figure that we're looking at right now. Nancy's motion doesn't specify when we want the funding. So although it's a good idea to be clear and ask the county for it, it may not be coming, anytime soon. It may be in or after October. So I'm not sure that is an exigency that needs to be addressed with an action tonight. And finally, this isn't an action that state law says school boards have to do. It's not budget. It's not hiring the superintendent, and it's not creating policy. It's writing a letter. It's an administrative action. We don't need a vote to make a decision to have the chair and the superintendent set a letter. We can do that through conversation and by, the board members deciding that it's, a good thing to do. It's an administrative item. So it doesn't really require a vote. And I think we can, after a little bit more discussion, we can figure out what it is we want to say and make a clear communication to the county board, with what our needs and desires are. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. Ms. Talento.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. I just have a quick question. Will there be a leadership meeting in August? I know that the county board recesses in August. We generally recess in July, but we didn't do that this year due to the pandemic. Do you know if there'll be a leadership meeting scheduled for August, or is your next one in September?
No, I believe we will have another leadership meeting in August because of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Just at this point, I don't think I have enough information to make a vote on the decision. I will be abstaining. I do think that we need to make a formal request. I think that for me, it's very simple. We request $4 million for the first quarter to ensure that we don't lay off any employees, based on the fact that we are going to be using it to fund employees that are self-funded through programs that we cannot put in operation in a traditional format. I don't think that letter is inappropriate, but tonight on this motion, this may be a good number. I don't have enough information, so I'll be abstaining from the vote.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talento. Dr. Cannonen.
Thank you. Let me just start by saying I 100% agree, and I think everyone is saying a different version of the fact that we are in an urgent situation. Urgent can be used in different ways. We are in an urgent situation. Whether there's an urgent need to do something tonight is what I'm concerned about. And I want to thank Mr. Goldstein was getting into a little bit of the cash flow. Just want to share that I was going to ask about that, but as I started thinking about the cash flow, I realized that another thing that we talked about with the county leaders yesterday were our upcoming agendas. They shared that they are in recess in the month of August. So their next county board meeting is, do they meet the third week of every month? Their next county board meeting would be the third week in September. So any request we make, they're not going to be able to act on unless I'm missing something, but that's what they told us yesterday. They wouldn't be able to act on it anyway until the third week of September. So I really do not think that there's an urgency to, make a decision on anything tonight. My sense is, and thank you, Ms. Talento, for asking, we will surely have at least one leadership meeting before their next county board meeting, and possibly two, very likely two, I think, given the pandemic. As we mentioned, Dr. Duran, shared with them, emailed them each the Excel spreadsheet. I think that, Dr. Duran might very well decide, as Reed said, kind of as the administrator, to put that in letter form next time. And we can literally hand deliver them a letter, hard copy if we meet in person. I don't know if we will. We could email it to them. And that is something that we can just do. That can, in fact, be something that we can plan to update them on at every leadership meeting. I just want to mention that on the agenda for that leadership meeting, it literally referred to APS financial needs. Those were the words that were used on the agenda. So again, I think that we all in good faith believed that that's exactly what we were communicating. But if people think that it's better to do it in letter form, I think the best way to do it, frankly, is for the superintendent and chair to decide to write a letter that clarifies, and then it's sort of an update, right? Because we don't have, 12.64 is almost surely not the right number. Next month, we might know something about the state budget, we might not. But we might have some of those other TBDs filled in, and then in September, we might have a little bit more. So that can just be something that we can sort of update as we go. But again, given that the county board's next meeting is toward the end of September, I don't really see the urgency in going forward with I'm not going to be voting in support of this motion. I don't see the urgency of taking this action right now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cannon, and I appreciate that. I personally would like a little bit more information regarding timing, regarding exactly how much we're talking about that may put us in harm's way, and to help ensure that we have the staff in place. I do think it's important for us to hold on to our cafeteria workers. I do think it's important for us to also, I hope, figure out a way to keep as many of our extended day staff employed as long as we can afford it. And I want to have more information so that I can so that we can take much more clear information to the county board as we're looking at this. As I mentioned, this information is really only about 24 hours old, and I think we need more information. I do appreciate the spirit of what Ms. Van Dorn is saying, and I take that to heart, and will continue in our conversations on behalf of the board to express the sincere desire and need for us to have clarity. But I don't feel at this point in time that I have enough information to share to be able to craft a letter in a way that can address that in I think the most successful way for us to move forward. We're going to continue to have to be looking at this, and I want to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row exactly on what is critical need, and I think that it's going to take a little bit more time to do that. So I would like to continue to work with my colleagues on the best way to express that to the county, to ensure that they have the information that they need as they continue to plan, as they continue to look at their needs and their uncertainty. And so I think I personally would need a little bit more time and information before I could vote on this motion. But with that, I think that we all have spoken, and now I'd like to ask again, I guess, for Ms. Van Dorn to read the motion so we can move towards a vote.
I move that the school board chair and superintendent send, I was reading it from the screen. Okay, hang on. I move that the school board chair and superintendent send a letter to the county board to request $12.64 million to fund Arlington Public Schools deficit needs for the first quarter of the 2020-2021 school year to fund critical costs related to the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Van Dorn. I think this motion has already been seconded. And so I would ask Ms. Elliott to call for a roll vote. Thank you.
All those in favor of the motion, please say yes. Those opposed say no. Mr. Goldstein?
No.
Dr. Cannonen?
No.
Ms. O'Grady?
No.
Ms. Talento?
I abstain.
Ms. Van Dorn?
Yes.
Motion fails 1-3 with one abstention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Elliott. May I ask my colleagues if there is any more additional new business? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.